Hi everyone, I know you are watching this content to accompany your sleep. So before we start, I want to know where you are watching from and what time you are watching. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. Ardith Wood, a stunning 27-year-old, was not only beautiful but also exceptionally intelligent. She was on the path to earning a doctoral degree in philosophy from Waterloo University, while simultaneously working as an editor for a philosophy journal. Ardith's dream of becoming a professor was about to come true. The summer of 2003 arrived. Ardith decided to spend her vacation visiting her family in Ottawa, Canada. She had a wonderful time with her loved ones, going on walks together and cooking at home. On the morning of August 6th, the young woman went for a run. When she returned, her thoughtful parents were already waiting for her with a delicious breakfast dessert. It was a warm and sunny day, so Ardith decided to go for a bike ride. Her brother kindly allowed her to borrow his bicycle. The girl promised to be back in that day. Her mother planned to go shopping before lunch, awaiting her daughter's return from the ride. Ardith loved cycling along the picturesque route through the forest, past the river and cliffs. This trail was popular among local cyclists. It was always peaceful and safe here, but not this time. 27-year-old Ardith never came home. Her mother was worried about her, and then a heavy downpour started. The woman understood that her daughter wouldn't be riding in such weather, but time passed, and she still wasn't back. The family set out to search, assuming the girl might have fallen off her bike and needed help. Bike paths wound through the entire city, and they didn't know which direction Ardith had gone this time, so her relatives searched all over town. Their efforts were fruitless, and when it got dark, they went to the police. Due to the bad weather, the search was postponed until morning. The next day, there was no news about Ardith. One of the largest search operations in Ottawa's history began. It involved rescuers, police officers, dog handlers with their canines and helicopters. In total, about 1,000 people, including numerous volunteers. Ardith's family actively participated in the search, posting flyers with the girl's photo all around the city. But the first few days yielded no progress. The police turned to the public for help. Soon, a call came from a local resident. She said that on the day of Ardith's disappearance, she was in the forest on the bike path and saw a creepy guy with a bicycle there. The witness described him as a young man with a pleasant appearance, well-dressed, but behaving extremely suspiciously. His conduct was frightening. It turned out the stranger had tried to push the girl off her bike and drag her into the bushes. Fortunately, other people appeared on the trail. The perpetrator fell behind, and she managed to escape quickly. After this incident, she no longer felt safe on walks and stopped cycling alone. According to the girl, it happened in an area called Green Creek. She suggested that the stranger might have attacked Ardith as well. The eyewitness was invited to the police station to create a composite sketch. She described the suspect as a young man, 30 years old, light-skinned, dark-haired with a beard and glasses, pleasant-looking and athletically built. The sketch was shown to Ardith's family, but they didn't recognize anyone familiar to the missing woman. Many men wore similar glasses and beards at the time, so suspicion could fall on anyone. The investigators decided not to publish the portrait in the media, fearing a wave or false calls. The police constantly asked local residents for help, showing Ardith's photo. Law enforcement was confident. Such a bright, beautiful girl with a memorable appearance couldn't have gone unnoticed. Someone must have seen her and could provide a lead. This assumption proved true. 16-year-old Laura called the police. She said that on the day of the disappearance, while riding past on her bicycle, she saw Ardith on the bike trail. The missing woman was sitting on a rock, seemingly resting. When Laura rode further, she heard a scream. Turning around, the girl saw Ardith arguing with some guy. Laura didn't know what to think. Maybe it was just a lover's quarrel. Ardith wasn't calling for help, and then she went into the woods with that man. Laura wanted to find out what was happening, but got scared. Seeing the approaching storm, the 16-year-old witness hurried home. As she was leaving, she thought she heard someone screaming. The police invited Laura to the station to show her the composite sketch of the stranger. She recognized him. According to the girl, it all happened around 1 p.m. in the same place, Green Creek. Later, the police received several more calls from girls who encountered this creepy guy on the trail. He attacked them, but the victims were lucky to escape. One woman's call particularly stood out. She recounted how an attractive stranger approached her during a walk. They had a pleasant conversation, but suddenly his behavior changed drastically. The men started grabbing her. But the woman managed to push the attacker away with her bicycle and quickly flee. She didn't even look back, afraid he would catch up. After returning home, the woman told her family about the incident and warned her loved ones to stay away from that place. Oddly, none of the girls who were attacked reported it to the police. The search for Argith concentrated around the creek area. Soon, her bicycle was found, indicating the police were on the right track. Meanwhile, the investigators received another call that became a breakthrough in the case. A man, without giving his name, reported an unpleasant incident in the forest. A terrible accident. Allegedly, he didn't want to harm Argith or take her life. Confused, he decided to get rid of the body. The stranger carried the girl across the creek, dug a small pit and buried her there, covering the grave with branches. Then he hung up. The police managed to trace the call. It was made from a phone booth 20 minutes away from Ottawa. Law enforcement rushed there, hoping to find witnesses or lift fingerprints or DNA from the receiver. But disappointment awaited them. Someone had thoroughly wiped the handset. Neither eyewitnesses nor surveillance cameras could be found. The search for Argith continued in Green Creek. Dogs trained to detect the smell of corpses arrived at the scene. Soon, the worst fears of the family and the police were confirmed. With the help of the dogs, they managed to find the missing woman's grave, located between two trees in a quiet, picturesque spot. Coming closer, the detectives saw the half-buried, naked body of the girl. Likely, the criminal was startled by someone, which is why he buried the victim so sloppily. Criminologists started examining the crime scene, but, unfortunately, found no evidence, no fingerprints or DNA. The medical examiner confirmed it was Ardith Wood. She died a horrific, agonizing death that didn't resemble an accident at all, contrary to what the stranger said in his conversation with the police. The cause of death was drowning. Algae were found in her lungs, so the girl was still alive when she ended up in the water. Despite the body being found naked, the medical examiners didn't find unequivocal signs of rape, although they didn't rule it out. The police believed the crime was sexually motivated. In their opinion, the stranger hunted girls in a deserted place for this purpose. Otherwise, what else could have driven him? The detectives needed to catch the criminal urgently to avoid new victims. They were convinced he had attacked several girls and had already killed one. How far could the maniac go? The police decided to publish a composite sketch of the suspect in the media, asking the public for help in identifying him. Investigators received about 4,000 calls with leads and began processing them, which took a lot of time. On September 10th, the police released important information about the suspect. It turned out that the girls who saw the stranger in the forest had noticed one detail. He had an eagle tattoo on his left shoulder. This was a crucial lead that could help track down the criminal. The media published a sketch of the tattoo, after which several calls came to the police. People reported acquaintances with bird tattoos on their faces, necks, or backs. However, this information led nowhere. In April 2004, while processing another batch of calls, investigators came across an important clue. A man claimed he knew the killer. The person lived in the area and was riding a bicycle in the Green Creek vicinity at the time of the crime. The detectives were interested in this information and invited the specified suspect for a conversation. When the guy entered the police station, the investigators were amazed. He matched the criminal's description both in appearance and age. During the conversation, the young man was noticeably nervous. He said he often rode his bike along that trail, not understanding what the issue was. When the police asked him to show his shoulder, an eagle tattoo was found there. It turned out that the man had previously had problems with the law. He became the prime suspect. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. The entire time, the suspect answered questions defiantly and aggressively. He said about himself, "I'm like a scorpion under a rock. You never know what I'm going to do." The guy had no alibi, but couldn't say what he was doing on the day of Ardith's disappearance. However, he denied involvement in the girl's murder. There was insufficient evidence against him, so the suspect was released but placed under surveillance. A few weeks later, he was invited for questioning again. The detectives had gathered a lot of information about him and carefully prepared their questions. They also suggested the young man take a polygraph test. The suspect agreed and easily passed all the tests. The police couldn't believe it, but had to let him go, dropping all suspicions. The investigation had reached a dead end. The Ottawa police announced a $50,000 reward for any information that would help solve the case. It was the largest amount law enforcement had ever offered under similar circumstances. Soon, about 5,000 calls with leads came in, which the police began to check. One portion of information mentioned the name Christopher Myers, which caught the investigators' attention. It turned out he had previous convictions for selling prohibited substances. Colleagues described 25-year-old Chris as a quiet, non-confrontational, and even inconspicuous guy who worked as a janitor. His face was remarkably similar to the composite sketch of the suspect. Moreover, he had the same beard. The police were delighted, thinking they had finally found the right man. But it turned out Christopher had an alibi for the day of our death's disappearance. The landlady of the apartment he was renting claimed that on August 6, 2003, the young man was at home in the morning and then went to work at a restaurant. This surprised the police because a year had already passed. How could the woman remember the details of that day so clearly? Another problem arose. Christopher didn't have an eagle tattoo on his shoulder, although witnesses insisted they had seen this tattoo on him. Maybe he had it removed. The detectives were convinced this was the person they needed and had to prove it. A few weeks later, another similar attack occurred. In the evening, a girl who closely resembled our death was walking alone across a bridge when she heard someone walking behind her. Turning around, she saw an attractive man on a bicycle. The girl had no intention of making acquaintances or talking and asked to be left alone. The man rode past her, and just as she sighed with relief, the stranger turned his bicycle around and rushed straight at her. There was no one around who could help. The attacker jumped off his bike and forcibly dragged the victim into the bushes. The girl screamed very loudly, which seemed to frighten the assailant. He fled. The victim went to the police. Other investigators took on this case. Everyone assumed it was an attempted robbery, and the detectives investigating our death's disappearance found out about the incident much later. In May, another attack occurred on a tall blonde woman similar to the missing person. The girl was returning late in the evening from a party when a stranger approached her and tried to strike up a conversation. She asked to be left alone. Then he started asking for help, claiming he was lost. The girl explained where he should go, and he left. She breathed a sigh of relief, but literally 10 minutes later, he attacked her from the bushes. The assailant furiously began strangling her, twisting her neck. At that moment, the girl thought it was the end, but she continued to resist, screaming, hitting him, biting. Her screams attracted the attention of the residents of the building, who came out to see what was happening. This frightened he fled, but this time he made a serious mistake. In his haste, he dropped his phone. Investigators established that the mobile belonged to Christopher Myers, whom they suspected in the Oddith murder case. The puzzle came together. Chris committed all the similar crimes. He chose girls with similar appearances, blondes, and attacked them. Christopher was brought in for questioning, but he wasn't in a hurry to confess to the murder. He said he had never been to Green Creek, had never seen Oddith, and wasn't involved in the other attacks. Chris complained about mental health issues and uncontrollable aggression, but insisted he hadn't caused physical harm to anyone. The detectives noticed he had crooked teeth and persuaded him to take a polygraph test. The test lasted 5 hours, and Chris failed it miserably. But despite this, he still continued to claim his innocence, saying the polygraph was wrong. Since the results of the lie detector test weren't considered evidence, the suspect had to be released. For the next 5 months, detectives gathered evidence against him, interrogating everyone who knew Christopher. Relatives, friends, colleagues, and his ex-girlfriend. It turned out Christopher was born into a dysfunctional family of alcoholics. His difficult childhood was accompanied by the development of various mental disorders, attention deficit disorder, and schizoid disorder. Chris was taken from his birth family and adopted by another couple. The adoptive parents treated the boy with love, but he was uncontrollable. They couldn't cope with raising the troubled child and returned him to the orphanage when Chris turned 12. As he grew older, he seemed to become an ordinary, normal guy. Christopher graduated from school, entered university, socialized with friends, and lived in a dormitory. But his roommate considered Chris abnormal. He told creepy stories that frightened her. Eventually, she kicked him out of the room. Chris's ex-girlfriend revealed that he loved cycling along the trails of Ottawa and was fascinated by the picturesque scenery. She also disclosed his main secret. Christopher enjoyed temporary tattoos. For a while, he had the exact image of an eagle on his shoulder. The girl was shown a sketch of the tattoo, and she confirmed that he had the same one on his left shoulder. Christopher was summoned for questioning on October 13, 2005. He was placed in a very cramped interrogation room. This time, The conversation was conducted by burly men who pushed their chairs right up against Chris. All this put tremendous psychological pressure on the suspect. The investigators started with simple words. "We know everything about you, Chris. We know it was you who killed our death." Christopher responded evasively. 3 hours later, he began to give testimony, confused and inconsistent. Chris admitted that he was in Green Creek that day and met our death. Struck by her beauty, he decided to get acquainted. He started giving compliments, chatting nicely, and then invited the girl into the woods, and she agreed. Once there, Christopher began hugging and kissing her, showing the detectives exactly how. And then, according to him, it all ended. Our death recoiled from him. Apparently, she didn't like his manners. She ran away but fell into the creek. Christopher tried to save the girl but failed. He wanted to portray himself as a hero, but this absolutely didn't correspond to his subsequent actions. For some reason, he pulled our death's body out of the water, undressed it, and buried it. When the policeman stated that Chris was going to be charged with murder, he immediately retracted his words. "No, I never met her. It was a joke. I took all the information from the newspapers." The detective had to have a serious one-on-one conversation with him. Eventually, Chris confessed to killing our death. He even drew a map with the trails in Green Creek where he met the girl. On it, he mocked another person, Laura, who saw him with the victim in the forest. Laura recognized the suspect as the same man she had seen then. Christopher was arrested on October 20th, 2005. He agreed to go to the crime scene to recreate the events. But when they arrived at the indicated trail, Christopher suddenly declared that it wasn't the right location, claiming everything happened elsewhere, although everything matched. Christopher had an unstable psyche. He would give testimony and then retract his words. Later, he also confessed to other attacks on girls. He was charged with additional crimes for these offenses. At the trial, the lawyer stated that Christopher was just a troubled young man. At first, the accused denied his previous confessions, but later, on the advice of his defense attorney, he decided to make a deal with the investigation and plead guilty. On January 8, 2008, 5 years after the murder, the defendant confessed to the crime but refused to disclose the motives and details. Later, he also admitted to the other attacks. The prosecution believed that on that day, Chris wasn't on the forest trail by chance. He was stalking his prey like a hunter. He attacked several girls who were lucky enough to escape. The likely motive was sexual assault. Ardith was unlucky that day. She was Christopher's type, an attractive blonde. He tried to get acquainted with her, but something went wrong, and an argument broke out between them, which was overheard by a teenage girl riding by. Under some pretext, the killer managed to lure Ardith into the woods. There, he attacked her, started undressing her, intending to rape her. To save herself, the girl ran away and jumped into the creek. Chris rushed after her, caught up, and drowned her, then buried the body. The victim's parents agreed with the prosecution's version. According to them, Ardith was a good swimmer and couldn't have drowned in the creek. In their opinion, the defendant deliberately drowned the girl. However, it remained a mystery to them how Christopher managed to convince Ardith to go into the woods with him. As part of the deal with the investigation, Christopher pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a right to parole only after 10 years. In 2020, he filed a relevant petition, but the commission rejected it, recognizing the high risk of repeated crimes against women. In 2007, a plaque in memory of Ardith was installed on one of the centuries-old oaks in Green Creek Park, and in 2017, during a powerful thunderstorm, just like on the day of a murder, lightning struck the same tree. The oak suffered serious damage, and experts didn't believe it would survive. But a miracle happened. The mighty tree withstood. It still grows as a living monument to the girl who was killed nearby. Scott Dean Ponder was born on February 7, 1973, and was raised by his love and family, consisting of his mother, Beverly Guy, and his stepfather, Terry Guy. From an early age, Scott showed interest in cars and motorbikes that was greatly supported by his parents, who wanted him to improve his riding skills. They even got him a racer's license when he turned legal. Young Scott started taking racing as a lifestyle, even participating at the Daytona Motor Speedway in Florida. His sharp skills and excellent racing earned him numerous admirers and turned him into a local hero in the town of Chesney. Scott was also very social and preferred to hang out with large groups. People also loved Scott's company. Scott started the idea of the superbike motorsports first at his grandmother's backyard in the late 1990s, where he would repair bikes. Slowly, he started to upgrade his shop to a one-garage building in 2001. He even decided to take in his best friend, Brian Lucas, as his co-partner in the business, and the two young men started to expand their business further. They signed up with Suzuki for a dealership, and their business grew unexpectedly in a short period of time. Brian, who used to work part-time at the starting of the business, decided to leave this job to become a full-time manager of the store. With their hard work and knowledge, the pair started attracting a lot of customers, and the business started to bloom. Even though they were salesmen, they took utmost care when it came to their customers' knowledge about bikes or racing in general. Scott's mother, who first visited the store occasionally, now started to pay regular visits. Soon, she took up the job of taking care of the accounting, payroll, cash drops, and other such work. With the trio, the business boomed, selling 100,000 motorbikes every month. Scott decided to attend an industry convention in Chicago. It was during this trip that Scott met his wife, Melissa Brackman, a former homecoming queen from Stafford High School. They immediately clicked and started to enjoy each other's company, thus meeting up with each often. As their relationship grew stronger, they decided to get married. Their love life, both before and after their marriage, married that of a fairy tale where the love grew stronger every passing day. To complete their family, Scott and Melissa decided to have a baby, but unfortunately for them, none of their attempts were bearing any fruit. Frustrated, the couple sought medical attention and advice, and finally, after months of struggles, Melissa was pregnant with a little baby boy in October of 2003. With millions of sales in the very first year of business, Scott knew he had to expand his store even more. In order to do this, he required more hands on deck and decided to hire a new mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Chris was quite well known around town for his skilled use of the wrench that attracted Scott towards him. The four of them, Scott, Everly, Brian, and Chris, became a sort of a dream team, and their business started to gain attention even outside the small town of Chesney. Everything was going perfectly for the young and talented Scott Ponder, until the arrival of his doomsday. Living such a perfect life, Scott never imagined his happiness to be cut short. But this was what happened on November 6, 2003. It was a normal day, with not a cloud in the sky, and the sun was beaming, but it was not the case at the Superbike Motorsports. Scott and the others started their day at the shop like any other. There were a few customers browsing items in the store. One of them was Kelly Sisk, who had his 4-year-old son with him. He was going to buy a go-kart for his family, and after paying for it, he hung around in the shop for a little while longer. Brian actually had the day off because he was paying to go on a holiday with his family, but he was called in by Scott because there was a customer who said that the bike was not tended to as they promised. Brian came to the shop and immediately started to work the customer's bike. Scott was tending to another customer when Beverly came by after taking Scott's cancer-stricken grandmother to chemo. She used to take deposits for her son to the bank, and that day, she was intending to do the same. When she dropped by, she started to help Scott a little at the counter, since she was planning to go to the bank much later. At around 2:30 p.m., Scott's friend Noah Lee called the shop. Beverly answered the phone, and he asked if he could stop by the shop, and it would only take him 7 minutes for him to reach the shop, to which Beverly agreed. The conversation was short, and after putting the phone back down, Beverly decided to use the bathroom. In the span of 7 minutes, all 4 people in the shop, Scott, Brian, Beverly, and Chris, were savagely shot to death in the Superbike Motorsports premises. At 3:00 p.m., when Scott's friend Noah came by, he saw Scott and Brian lying at the front of the shop as still as statues. At first, he felt they were playing a trick on him. He even lightly kicked both of them, telling them to stop messing with him until he saw the pool of blood underneath their bodies, and immediately dialed 911. Police and paramedics immediately rushed to the scene. After all, it was the first ever quadruple murder in such a small town like Chesney. The news of the homicide spread like wildfire, and not only the victim's family, but a dozen other people gathered at the crime scene in order to catch a glimpse. The police wasted no time and immediately started the investigation. They found the mechanic, Chris' body, at the back of the shop. It was bent over as if he was working on a bike right before he was robbed of his life. Next they found Beverly's body inside the shop, right in front of the bathroom. The police believe she was ambushed right when she came out of the bathroom. The police found Brian and Scott's bodies, both lying at the front of store. Brian's body was closer to the door near the sidewalk, while Scott's body was closer to one of the parked cars in the parking lot. This, the police inferred, was maybe because both Scott and Brian were trying to run for their lives. They went inside, probably on hearing the gunshots, and came face to face with a shooter, and on seeing the dead bodies of Chris and Beverly, they immediately ran out the door, but their attempt to escape failed miserably. The police and forensic team searched the crime scene thoroughly and gathered blood samples and other evidence from the crime scene. This was an execution-style homicide, where the shooter entered the shop with the motive to murder the people present there and shot them in the chest and head point blank. Scott's wife, Melissa, got a call about the shooting and immediately rushed to the scene. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation, and it didn't take them long to arrive at their first clue. From the statements made by a few passerbys in the area at the time of the murder, they declared to have spotted a couple loitering near the shop. Sketches of the suspects were drawn during the questioning of these eyewitnesses, and the detectives immediately circulated the pictures all over South Carolina. The detectives speculated that the man was the one who shot the victims, Chris and Beverly, at the back, while the woman was distracting the two men, Scott and Brian, up front. When the man came to the front, where the two men were, he shot them. This was just mere speculation by the detectives, and none of the facts in this theory were proven. Months passed, and police couldn't find any clue regarding the case. Extensive media coverage of the case started putting pressure onto the detectives as they started to revisit the crime from a different perspective, and, sure enough, a breakthrough appeared. Detectives started to do a thorough study of the victims' past and current lifestyles, and though Scott, Beverly, and Brian's backgrounds came out to be clean, it was not the same for the mechanic, Chris Schaubert. When detectives checked Chris' previous job, the news of a drug connection came into the picture. The detectives found out that Chris might have been involved with the wrong company and was also responsible for smuggling drugs. Moreover, Chris was scheduled to go to court the following Monday before the murder took place. It was 2003 when drug smuggling and abuse was increasing every single day, and the Glyphs were hoping to arrest the key criminal players to eradicate the root cause of drug abuse, especially among young teens. The detectives and the public now started to wonder if this quadruple homicide took place with the motive to murder only Chris, and the other three victims were just collateral damage. They even started to speculate that maybe the people involved in this drug business felt that Chris would give evidence against them in court on Monday and decided to end his life. The detectives said that this could be a possibility since Chris was the one who was shot first. However, regarding this path of speculation, no evidence was found by the police. Therefore, the investigation stalled again. Finally, after a whole year, the detectives approached the case from a completely different angle once again. The detectives found that Brian, Scott's friend and coworker, was looking for a house weeks before the murder, but strangely enough, his wife Robin had no idea regarding this decision taken by him. Later, Brian's mother, Lorraine Lucas, spoke of the unhappy and strained marriage between the pair and how Brian was planning to move out to live alone. Though this didn't seem to have a connection to the shooting, a discovery made by the detectives a few days later brought out a shocking revelation to the case. This quadruple homicide took the lives of 4 people and broke the hearts of many others. The victims' families were coping with the hard times, but it was especially hard for Melissa. Her life was perfect before it all came crashing down when her beloved husband was shot. Despite all this, Melissa knew she couldn't give up now that she had a new reason to continue living, and that was her son. When Melissa's son, Scott Ponder Jr., was born in June 2004, Melissa was still being called upon by the police at intervals for interrogation. In one such incident, the police collected the DNA sample of Scott Jr. from a discharged diaper when Melissa had changed him at the station itself. The results of the DNA test left everyone dumbfounded. According to the reports, Scott Jr. was not the child of Scott, but Brian, since his DNA matched with Brian's found at the crime scene. This created tension between Melissa and her father-in-law, William Ponder, who kept asking her if this was true. The detectives started to approach this case from the point of a possible love triangle between Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Questions about her being unfaithful to her husband spread all throughout the neighborhood. Moreover, Brian's mother stated that it was possible for Brian to have an affair, considering how unhappy Brian was in his marriage, and the thought of divorce might have crossed his head at times. Melissa was called multiple times to the police station for interrogation about her affair, but she was resolute. She said that both she and Scott had struggled a lot to conceive this baby, and Scott Jr. was undoubtedly Scott Ponder's child. She later told about how she was harassed every day by the same questions when she knew it was hers and Scott's baby. For the next year and a half, detectives kept track of every move made by Melissa in order to find a breakthrough. Finally, after 18 months, however, the detectives claimed that there must have been a mistake regarding the blood sample collected at the crime scene. The detectives stated that they'd conducted a DNA test for Beverly and Scott from the blood sample collected from the crime scene, and the results did not match. In the reports, Brian's DNA matched Beverly's when clearly, Scott was the son of Beverly. At this point, the detectives knew that they'd made a grave mistake. They put the wrong name in the blood sample of Scott and Brian collected from the crime scene, since both the of Scott and Brian were lying next to each other. This cleared up all the accusations laid against Melissa. Disregarding the love triangle theory, detectives now started to link the case with another homicide, just 30 miles away, that had happened just 5 months before the Superbike Motorsports homicide. On May 16, 2003, the people of Greer, South Carolina heard the news of a triple homicide that took place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. Sylvia Holtz-Claw was on duty that day, though she had a day off. Soon, a local couple, E.B. and Maggie Barnes, visited the bank. At around 1:30 p.m., a 911 call went through to the Greer Police Department regarding a shooting that had taken place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank, where Sylvia, E.B., and Maggie were shot to death. Just like in the Superbike Motorsports, the shooting happened in broad daylight, with no witnesses available. When police checked the CCTV footage, they saw a red car that was driving to the bank at around 1:24 p.m., and it was soon again when it was driving back from the bank, 3 minutes after the incident. Coincidentally, a similar red car was spotted during the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports. Detectives started to hunt down the red car and found a clue that it was stolen by 39-year-old Emerson Wright from a rental lot days before the homicide. The police concluded that he'd entered the bank to rob, but panicked and shot the couple when they tried to intervene. Unfortunately, the detectives never got to question Emerson regarding the bank and the Superbike Motorsports murder because of how incidents unfurled 2 years later in another car chase involving him and the Georgia State Police. He was wanted for a series of burglaries in the Atlanta area. When he was chased by the state trooper, he crashed his car, got out, and shot himself with a single gunshot wound to his head. Later, the detectives declared that though there are similarities between the two cases, they didn't believe that the two cases were connected. Left with no clues or possible theories to continue their investigation, the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports turned into a cold case months later in 2004. For 13 years, Melissa, along with the other families of the victims, didn't stop with their efforts of finding any clue that might lead them to the person who was responsible for this atrocious crime, but to no avail. Finally, a ray of hope shone on them when the cold case of the quadruple murder that took place on November 6, 2003 in Superbike Motorsports reopened when the detectives got a breakthrough in the case in 2016, 13 years after the crime had been committed. The man behind the shooting came into the spotlight when he was arrested for a different murder that he committed, and during the interrogation, he confessed to the Superbike Motorsports quadruple murder. This man was 45-year-old Todd Culhemp. Todd was born on March 7, 1971, to mother Reggie Tagg and father William Samsel. His parents divorced when he was 2 years old, and though he started to live with his mother and a new boyfriend, he wanted to spend more time with his biological father. Todd was extremely aggressive and hyper, at times not having self when he was in nursery school. He killed a goldfish with Clorox bleach and shot a dog with a BB gun. He spent 3.5 months in Georgia Psychiatric Hospital, but there seemed to be no change in his aggressive behavior. His mother, Reggie, finally decided to send him to his father, William, hoping a change in the environment would help his behavior. On November 25, 1986, Todd planned a kidnapping of a girl named Christy Granado in Tempe, Arizona. He knocked on her door, threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, and demanded for her to follow him to his house. He brought her to his home, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and then proceeded to assault her. Afterwards, he walked her home and threatened to kill her entire family if she told anyone about what had happened. Christy, however, confessed everything to her parents, and her father called 911 immediately. Culhemp was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge, and the other charges were dropped. When he was released, Todd was a changed man. He started to work for himself, and even got a job. No further complaints were heard against him until 2016. On August 31st, 2016, 30-year-old Calla Brown and her boyfriend, the 32-year-old Charlie David Carver, went missing after they were last seen going to Todd's house to remove brush from one of Todd's properties. On November 3rd, 2016, investigators found Calla chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on the property of Todd. Later, investigators also retrieved the body of Charlie that had multiple gunshot wounds in it. Calla told the detectives that Todd shot Charlie and took her chained up. He would always assault her in a barbaric manner and threatened her not to find ways to escape. Todd was immediately arrested by the police and taken in for questioning. During this arrest, Todd confessed to being the person behind the shooting that took place at the Superbike Motorsports 13 years earlier. When Todd was called in for the interrogation on November 5th, 2016, he started to tell the detectives everything that happened on November 6th, 2003. He didn't confess out of fear or guilt, but merely as if recalling a memory. He said that he bought a Suzuki GSX R750 from Superbike Motorsports, but just days after buying the bike, he realized he couldn't ride it. Having no prior knowledge of riding a bike, Todd then decided to exchange the bike for another one that would be much easier to ride for a beginner such as Todd. He then told the detective that he was mocked by Scott and Brian for his inability to ride such a bike. The bike exchange didn't take place that day and Todd returned home. 14 days after the purchase, the bike got stolen from the front of the apartment complex where Todd lived. He filed a police complaint regarding the stolen bike, but the police never found the vehicle. Todd also mentioned that even the law enforcement officer made fun of him. He lost a $1,000 deposit for insurance, but neither the police nor the shop contacted him after that regarding the stolen bike. Todd started college and went to Greenfield Tech. His attraction towards bikes never faded, and soon he found himself going back to the Superbike Motorsports once again. He told the police that when he was browsing through the bikes in the shop, both Scott and Brian were giving negative remarks about him. Since then, whenever Todd visited the shop, the two men would mock and laugh at him. One day, he decided to take a Beretta 92 FS with him when he went to the shop. He waited for the customers to leave, and the shop was left with only Scott, Brian, Chris, and Beverly. Todd savagely shot all the victims to death. Though later he added that Beverly was not a target, she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hearing the confession made by Todd gave the victims' families the long-drawn justice and the closure that they were seeking for the past. Later, Todd also confessed to have killed 3 more people who were Johnny Joe Winmegan Lacoxie and Charlie David Carver. These 3 victims also died due to gunshots fired by Todd Culheap. In the case of Todd Culheap, even though it was a serial killer case, there was no trial that took place. Instead, prosecutors spoke to the families of those he'd murdered, as well as to the survivor, and decided to give him a plea deal instead of taking him to trial, where the state offered Todd life without the possibility of parole, which he accepted only 7 months after his arrest. Todd was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences on May 23, 2017. In addition, he was sentenced to 30 years for assault and 30 years for kidnapping. Not having a trial did not give the satisfaction to the victims' families regarding the justice that was needed to be served. It also angered the general public. It's not fair for families to wait years and years for 7th Circuit solicitor Barry Bynack later told reporters. But Scott Ponder's wife, Melissa, said that she was finally relieved to get closure regarding her husband's death after all these years. All the family members and relatives of the victims came together to hold a candlelight vigil in remembrance of their beloved ones whom they'd lost to the hands of a serial killer. After 13 drawn-out years of pain and suffering, the victims' families were grateful to finally learn what exactly happened to their loved ones. In one interview, Scott's wife, Melissa, did state that the reason Todd gave for murdering Scott and the others didn't sit right with her since she knew Scott well enough to know that he'd never make fun of someone and make them feel little in front of him. Nevertheless, she was grateful that justice had finally been served. The public was left disturbed by the lack of empathy and the casual behavior that Todd showed while being interrogated by the police or during his court appearances. They wanted Todd to receive the death penalty, since he was a monster to society. Today's case was truly a twisted and disturbing one. In this episode, we'll discuss the events that occurred in 2014. 31-year-old Carly McBride disappeared under mysterious circumstances after visiting her ex-boyfriend's house. After receiving a missing person report, the police began an investigation. However, it took the authorities almost 2 years to answer the question, Where did Carly disappear to? Carly was born on April 14, 1983, in the family of Steve McBride and Lorraine Williams. She was a cheerful and outgoing child with a close relationship with her parents. Growing up, Carly started experiencing more and more problems. She started abusing alcohol and illegal substances. Nevertheless, she made efforts to overcome these harmful addictions. In 2014, Carly was a 31-year-old woman that lived in Belmont, New South Wales, Australia. She was a mother of 2 children, 7-year-old son William and 3-year-old daughter Cadence. Carly's children were from different men, but I couldn't find any specific information about her relationship with her former partners. However, we know that Andrew Easton, Cadence's father, was one of the last people to see Carly. In 2013, Carly checked into a rehabilitation center to overcome her addiction to illegal substances. While there, she met Sale Kenneth Newson, the friendship with whom gradually grew into something more. From August 2014, Carly and Sale started spending almost all their time together. The couple had fights sometimes, but they seemed to be happy on the surface. On September 30th, 2014, Sale took Carly to Musselbrook, where her 3-year-old daughter Cadence lived with her father, Andrew Easton. Carly came to stay with her for a few hours. She entered the house of her former partner at about 12:30 p.m. Sale didn't stay with her, but they agreed he would return in a few hours. However, when Sale came to pick up Carly, she was no longer there. Carly's ex-partner, Andrew Easton, said they fought, so Carly left. She planned to go to the nearest McDonald's, located about a 20-minute walk from Andrew Easton's house. Puzzled that Carly didn't call to tell him where she would be waiting for him, Sale started calling her himself. Since all attempts were unsuccessful, Sale drove towards McDonald's, where she allegedly planned to go. Along the way, he looked around, hoping to find Carly sitting somewhere waiting for him. He suggested her phone was dead, but Carly was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't at McDonald's, where she supposedly went, or anywhere near it. Sale drove around the streets of Musselbrook for a while, but it was in vain. Carly seemed to disappear into thin air. When she didn't return home to Belmont that evening, Sale contacted the police. The detectives asked him the details of what had happened. It would be exactly the same thing every time. I would drop her off, she would get out and go to the front door. She would have her daughter in her arms and turn around and wave me off, Newsom said. She would ring me twice and text me twice every visit to let me know she was okay. But on that day I dropped her off about 12:30 p.m. and things were just different, and I didn't hear from her again. Not a thing. I texted her. I called her, but the phone just rang out. Newsom said he turned up at the house about 4:30 p.m. as usual to pick up Carly, only to be told by her ex that she had left after an argument earlier that afternoon and headed on foot towards a McDonald's restaurant about 1 mile away. Undoubtedly, the following question arose. Did Carly leave her ex-partner's house, or Andrew Easton was hiding something? His story suggested he was the last person to see her. However, no other witnesses could confirm that Carly really left his house. Police interviewed neighbors and people living along the route Carly would have taken if she had gone to McDonald's. The fact that no one saw her has further increased suspicions about her former partner. Unfortunately, no surveillance cameras near Andrew Easton's house could confirm or deny his words about Carly leaving around 2 p.m. After reviewing the recordings from the surveillance cameras at McDonald's, the investigators found no evidence she was ever there. Police searched fields behind a nearby residential area for clues. However, a chief investigator of this case said nothing particularly remarkable had been found, adding that the investigation would continue. They urged anyone with information about the disappearance of Carly McBride to contact the department. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, sandals, and a yellow t-shirt, and she was carrying a tan handbag. After obtaining a search warrant, the police examined the house where Carly was seen last. A group of police officers went there, hoping to find clues that could shed some light on what happened to the mother of 2 children. But after searching Andrew Easton's house, the police did not find new clues. Nothing there indicated that someone committed a crime in that house. However, investigators did find something suspicious. They discovered Carly's Facebook account got deleted a few hours after she vanished, before the official report of her disappearance. This mysterious deletion of her account on a social network raised a lot of questions. Are the account deletion and Carly's disappearance somehow connected? Was she the one to delete her account, or did someone else do it? Why was the account deleted? Perhaps the Facebook messages could tell about what happened, and that's why someone deleted the account. To get answers to these questions, the detectives turned to the U.S. Department of Justice, hoping the latter would help restore Carly's account and determine who could have deleted it. Facebook data analysis is done at the company's headquarters in Menlo Park, California, but Sergeant Wright said Ms. McBride's Facebook friends could help New South Wales police. We're asking if anyone may have been in contact with Carly via Facebook or any other social media in the days leading up to her disappearance. If anyone noticed anything unusual, if they could come forward and let us know, he said. Given the timing of the Facebook page being shut down, and in the context of the disappearance, we think it's hugely suspicious, but it's also something that could hold some vital information about what happened to Carly. Carly's parents didn't believe their daughter had just fled to start a new life. Close friend and flatmate Carly Smith said nothing appeared out of the ordinary as she spoke with Carly on the phone as she traveled to Musselbrook. She was so down to earth. I would call her a free spirit. She was easygoing. She just loved life, Ms. Smith said. She was always there for her friends. If you were having a bad day, she just knew, and she would be in contact. And she also made a plea. We all wake every day not knowing what happened, not knowing where she is, she said. You have to have a conscience. Come forward with some news. Just give us something. The police thoroughly searched the area where Carly was before her disappearance. The search included dogs, police divers examining the Hunter River and its surroundings, and aerial and trail bike patrols, and yet none of this helped to find any traces of Carly McBride. Months passed, but the investigation did not bring any results. Carly didn't leave any digital footprints. After she disappeared, she never turned on her phone. Her social media accounts were inactive, and she did not use bank cards. Investigators began to assume that Carly was no longer alive. 9 months after Carly's disappearance, her parents sought help finding their daughter. They were joined by Detective Timothy Seymour, who could contribute by requesting any information helpful to the case. Ms. McBride's mother, Lorraine Williams, shed tears during the public appeal and begged for help to find her beloved daughter. If you know anything, even if it's the smallest thing, please come forward and help us, she said. Steve and Lorraine said their family experienced difficulties after Carly's disappearance. We are coping the best we can, Mr. McBride said. As far as Carly's children are concerned, it's a fairly complex area. Both children have 2 different fathers, and to be honest, we haven't had too much close contact with those children. So, we're just hoping that changes so we can have further contact with them. Detective Inspector Timothy Seymour said officers had worked tirelessly since Ms. McBride's disappearance. We have a plethora of information that we are sorting through. However, we are still appealing again, Inspector Seymour said. The breakthrough moment may come from somebody who might think they have an innocuous piece of information. Over time, Carly's parents started realizing that they would probably never see their daughter alive again. Lorraine wrote a heartbreaking letter addressing the man who robbed her of her daughter. I don't believe there is one person who does not now know what happened to my bub, or hasn't noticed what has happened on that fateful day. Please help us for her children. They are innocent and gorgeous babies. Whoever you are, you have taken their mummy away, their lifeline to fun times and happiness in their lives, their tower of strength. They will never feel her soft, warm, and reassuring kisses, and her big, warm hugs with that big, contagious belly laugh of hers, and her radiant smile. Their memories are lost. They cannot say goodbye to her. Our pain, anguish, angst, and frustration are keeping us all down, causing us to wake up super vigilant that we might get a call to say they have found my bub. Whoever you are, you decided on that day to rip my daughter away from us, you bottom-feeding runt. We are left with question after question after question. We don't know how to grieve or what we are grieving. We are in a kind of grief limbo. Our little beautiful poor babies need to know where their mummy is. They are the innocent victims in this horrible nightmare we are enduring. Please someone come forward so they can move on and grow into the amazing people their mummy would have wanted them to be. We can't honor and respect Carly's life until she is found. My daughter is reeling you in, and you will be a fine catch when you least expect it. This is my only wish, that we find my bub, that we can put her to rest. It is a basic human right with the dignity and respect that she deserves. Then her babies and their beautiful but broken hearts and heads can start to heal, and they may have a life without the anguish and pain and angst. You didn't give my daughter a chance. Please give her children the knowledge they ache for. William and Cadence should not be burdened with this pain. Please help us give them some semblance of grief and loss in their journey. Carly is a proud Aboriginal woman, as is her beautiful sister, and I am proud and honored to be their mother. No one deserves this in life, but my baby is reeling you in. You are breaking while we are aching. Your truth is Carly's truth, and in turn is our truth. Please someone speak up. Since the police couldn't link Carly's disappearance to her ex-partner Andrew Easton, they turned their attention to another potential suspect, Sale Newson. During the investigation, they learned that the relationship between Carly and Sale was far from perfect. The man was very jealous, which was a frequent cause of their fights. Despite their relatively short relationship, Newson told everyone he was deeply in love with Carly, mentioning she was the first woman he had fallen in love with in the last 14 years. He desperately asked for any information, participated in launching a Facebook page, offered financial rewards, and knocked on every door in the area where she was last seen. But notwithstanding these public statements of love and devotion, Newson almost immediately started intimate relationships with other women. Besides, a few hours after reporting Carly missing, he offered sexual intercourse to several women. Carly disappeared on September 30th, and on October 2nd, Sale spent the night with another woman. But in public he behaved like an inconsolable guy who had lost the love of his life. Detectives also discovered that Sale and Carly had an argument 2 days before her disappearance. The reason for this fight was Facebook messages that Carly allegedly received from other men. However, all this was only circumstantial evidence. They needed direct links to bring any charges against Sale Newson. In April 2015, the authorities searched properties at 3 addresses, one in Muswell Brook and the other 2 in Scone. Scone is a town in the Upper Hunter Shire in the Hunter region of New South Wales, Australia. The distance from Scone to Muswell Brook is about 15 miles. During the searches, they seized 3 firearms and an unspecified amount of illegal substances and arrested a 24-year-old man, James Caneen. However, the police stressed that the charges weren't related to the ongoing investigation into Carly's disappearance, and yet they did arise during this investigation. Thus, we should keep this name in mind. Almost 2 years have passed since Carly was last seen alive. The police continued to investigate, but there were no new clues to help solve the case. But then suddenly there was a breakthrough. On August 7, 2016, in a rural area near Scone, 2 local pedestrians found the remains in a shallow grave in a bush just a few feet from the road. Forensic examination confirmed that these were the remains of Carly McBride, a mother of 2 from Belmont, who went missing on September 30, 2014, in Muswell Brook. The police postponed the announcement of finding her body for 4 days, hoping to obtain additional evidence. Superintendent Guyana repeated police suspicions that they did not suspect Carly, 31, had been snatched off a street by a stranger. We don't believe that this was a random act, so we are looking into her past and as many people as we can find, he said outside Scone Police Station. But he stopped short of identifying any suspects in the case, as it is all too fresh. It has taken us 2 years to get this breakthrough, and we have a fairly vast volume of fresh evidence that we need to evaluate in a thorough fashion, he said. We have put a lot of work into this in the past 2 years. The team here is pretty keen to solve this for Carly's family, and we have got so much new evidence now that it is going to take a lot of work, but we are well into it, he said. The heartbroken parents have told through tears of their desperate need for answers. Please come forward with anything, Lorraine sobbed. We still need to know who did this to my baby. The couple said they have had some closure now with her body being found, and were extremely grateful for the police and public help to find their lost daughter. For 10 months, the investigators carried out extensive work, which resulted in the issued arrest warrant for Sale Newson. On June 19, 2017, he was arrested and taken to a police station. Newson denied any involvement in the death of Carly McBride. However, Sale Newson wasn't the only one who received charges. Police believed that 26-year-old James Caneen was the one who helped Newson dispose of the body. Carly McBride, Sale Newson, and James Caneen met in a rehabilitation center for people with addiction to alcohol and illegal substances. Each one left the center at different times and for various reasons, but they stayed in touch. The trial of Sale Newson began in August 2018 and protracted for several years because the police had only circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors alleged that Newson met with Carly after she left her ex-partner's house, struck her several blows to the head and back in a jealous rage, and threw her body away. Forensic experts have determined that Carly McBride died from multiple blunt force trauma. She suffered 23 fractures to her skull, 13 fractures to the torso, and spinal and rib fractures. The judge said Carly McBride suffered blunt force at the hands of Newson before she died. Judge Arace also noted how Newson had told interviewing police he was a skilled mixed martial arts fighter. His main sport was Thai boxing. I had 20 fights and 20 wins. I trained alongside world champions, but when I got really good, I got too old, he told police. I find the cause death was severe trauma to the brain due to a high degree of force to the deceased's head, the judge said. I am satisfied the offender caused death by the use of fists or feet or both, or the use of objects. While searching Newson's house, police found the map in a shoebox under the bed. This map contained a drawn circle around the towns of Musselbrook and Scone. Carly's remains were found exactly in this radius. That map also had the numbers 1, 2, and 3 written on it in locations outside Musselbrook, with Senior Constable Mohini giving evidence that the first 2 numbers marked the location of point-to-point cameras. After the police found Carly's remains in 2016, Newson called her father, Steve. During the conversation, Newson mentioned that the found skeleton was missing hand bones, and yet, the police never disclosed this information. The only people who knew about it were the police, Carly's parents, and the Department of Forensic Medicine at the John Hunter Hospital. As the authorities believed, Newson knew about it because he was familiar with the crime scene, and he was the person who left Carly's body where they found it 2 years later. Moreover, the clothes on Carly's remains matched the ones she wore on the day of her disappearance. It suggested she died shortly after leaving her former partner's house. The police couldn't find her purse and phone. When police searched Newson's mobile phone, they discovered he had deleted Google location services between September 18th and October 2nd, 2014. During the trial, the investigators learned that the photo of Carly, which Newson took on the way to Musselbrook and later used in missing person flyers, was edited and cropped even before the police received the report of Carly missing. When the search for Carly began, Newson offered a $20,000 reward for information about her whereabouts. However, his bank account showed he was broke, which meant he offered the reward only because he knew no one would ever find her. Thus, he wouldn't have to pay. Newson injected himself into the police investigation from the start, trying to deflect suspicion onto others and attempting to get information about where police and other emergency services would be searching. He also conducted a canvass of the streets searching for CCTV or witnesses, which police said was done not to find information, but to suppress it and to determine if anyone had seen him intercepting Ms. McBride. And while volunteers and police searched for her around Musselbrook and handed out missing person flyers, Newson was in Sydney, messaging friends about how he was driving an Audi R8, as well as that Newson claimed to know the area where Ms. McBride was found, like the back of my hand, and described it to Carly McBride's father, Steve McBride, despite only seeing footage of a fake crime scene set up by police. The images you are seeing now are not a real crime scene, but a staged one that the police used to see Newson's reaction. The more investigators dug into Newson, interviewed him, looked at his Facebook messages, listened to his phone calls, the more he shone the light on himself. After examining his internet search history, investigators discovered that he was looking for information on how to delete a Facebook account. His account remained active, but Carly's account got deleted shortly after. Although all the evidence was circumstantial, the prosecutor said they did have puzzle pieces that began to reveal a picture when put together. Eventually, these pieces turned into an irrefutable case, ruling out any other possible explanations for how Carly McBride disappeared and how her body was about 82 feet from the side of the road. The judge concluded that the motive for the brutal and unplanned attack on Carly was Newson's jealousy. After he picked Carly up from Muswell Brook, he discovered she had spent about 90 minutes with her ex-partner, instead of spending time with her daughter, as was planned. Carly's daughter was not at home during that time, and the fact that she was alone with her ex-partner for an hour and a half allegedly ended with Newson attacking Carly in a jealous rage. Ms. McBride's mother, Lorraine Williams, told a sentencing hearing that she lived in a blur of grief and anxiety for 2 years as she waited for her happy, gorgeous, and outgoing daughter to come home to her 2 young children. Instead, the next time she saw Carly was in the morgue, a day she tearfully described as the worst day of her life. 43-year-old Newson was found guilty. In December 2021, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison with parole eligibility in 2038. After the sentencing, Newson turned to the judge to restate his innocence. James Cunning, who helped Newson dispose of Carly McBride's body, denied his guilt. However, in July 2022, a jury found him guilty too. The judge said Cunning lied to police in 3 interrogations to create a false alibi for Newson and deleted data from the phone to cover his tracks. Unfortunately, I couldn't find his picture, but it is known that when Cunning received charges in the Carly McBride case, he was already in prison for illegal weapons possession and prohibited substances. In November 2022, the 31-year-old Cunning showed almost no reaction when he was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison with a 4-year parole period. After the trial, Carly's parents said that although justice had prevailed and no matter the verdict, nothing would ever return their daughter. Ashley Renee Lyons was born on July 21, 1985. She was the youngest of her parents' 3 children. A native of Scott County, she was a member of the Cedar Grove Baptist Church and a 2003 Scott County High School graduate, in which she was very active in the FFA program. The letters FFA stand for Future Farmers of America. FFA is a dynamic youth organization that changes lives and prepares members for premier leadership, personal growth, and career success through agricultural education. Ashley's brother Chris was only a year older. They had a small car repair shop. They grew up repairing not only cars, but also everything that has an engine. Ashley liked cars, especially the fast ones. But Bobby Gibson, Ashley's best friend, knew that cars weren't the only thing Ashley was interested in. She was in love with Roger McBeef. The teenagers in love broke up shortly after the prom, but remained close friends. Even though they broke up, Ashley still thought Roger was the best. She was thrilled when she graduated high school, believing a better life awaited her. However, the lives of young people do not always turn out the way they plan. Ashley found out that she was pregnant and the father of her child was Roger. She did not hide it from her family. Her whole family supported her, looking forward to the baby's birth. But January 7, 2004, changed the lives of many people. That day started perfectly, but ended tragically. At the doctor's appointment, Ashley found out that she was going to have a son. She was happy when she shared this news with her mom, Carol. She even chose a name and wanted to name her son Landon. Ashley couldn't wait to share this exciting news with everyone. After showing her mom the ultrasound picture, she took a shower and did her makeup and hair. Ashley told her brother Chris and her mom Carol that she was going to Lexington. If we look at the map, we can see that Lexington is about 20 miles from Stampton Ground, and Ashley would have gotten there in about 35 or 40 minutes. She said she had plans to meet Roger and his parents at a restaurant there. Ashley was going to show them the ultrasound picture. It was cold that evening, and it was expected to snow later. Ashley's mom, Carol, offered to take her car, but she refused, saying she wasn't going for long and would be back before the snow started. Recalling that day, Carol said that the last words she heard from her daughter were, but unfortunately, that night changed the lives of the Lyons family forever. After dinner, they heard the phone ring in their house. Chris answered it and heard Roger's voice asking if Ashley was home. Chris replied that she had already left. Roger said he would not be able to meet with Ashley. He said he called her, but she didn't answer the phone. Chris assumed that Ashley had left her phone in the car and gone to the restaurant. Time passed, but no one could get in touch with Ashley. Her mother called her several times, but she didn't answer. It was already 8 p.m., but Ashley still wasn't home. But when she left, she said she wasn't going for long. At about 9 p.m., Carol called Roger's mother and said that Ashley had not returned home after meeting them at the restaurant. Roger's mother's answer surprised Carol and made her even more worried. She said they did not see Ashley that day because the meeting had to be canceled. Upon hearing this, Carol was horrified. If her daughter wasn't at the restaurant, then where was she? Carol had a bad feeling. After all, Ashley wasn't answering her phone. A lot of thoughts raced through her mind as she tried to figure out where Ashley was and if she was okay. Around 10 p.m., Chris and his father decided they couldn't just sit and wait and went looking for Ashley. They knew which restaurant Ashley was supposed to meet Roger and his parents at. When they arrived there, they didn't see Ashley's car. They searched for Ashley for several hours, but she was nowhere to be found. At some point, Chris decided to check out Scott County Park because he knew Ashley liked that place. She fed the ducks there all the time and often went there with Roger when they were a couple. Looking at the map, we can see that Scott County Park is about 10 miles from Stamping Ground. While driving around the park, Chris and his father saw a car similar to Ashley's. The car was running and had the lights on. As they got closer, they realized it really was Ashley's car. It's hard to imagine what thoughts they had at that moment. Chris ran to the car and saw that the driver's side window was down. Ashley was sitting in the car with her head down. She was wearing a seatbelt and was unresponsive. Chris opened the door and started shaking Ashley. He hoped she was just sleeping, but then Chris looked at his hand and saw blood. He immediately called 911. Unfortunately, by the time Chris called 911, Ashley was already dead and doctors couldn't help her. Soon after, Ashley's mom heard the worst news of her life. She couldn't believe Ashley was gone. While Ashley's family was overwhelmed with grief, the investigators arrived at the crime scene. Since Ashley was dead before the ambulance arrived, and since it was evident that her death was the result of a crime, her body remained in the car until the investigators examined the scene for possible evidence. The first thing they noticed at the scene was that the engine was running, the heater and radio were on, and the driver's side window was down. They quickly determined the cause of Ashley's death. There were 3 9mm shell casings on the ground next to the car. Ashley had gunshot wounds to the head and neck. The police searched the park, but couldn't find the weapon of the crime. The fact that someone shot Ashley through the open side window of her car said a lot. It was chilly that night, and the fact that the window was down was suspicious. The position she was sitting in indicated that she was not trying to defend herself or escape. Putting all this together, the investigators concluded that Ashley knew the person who shot her. It was cold and the heater in her car was on, which meant Ashley rolled down the side window when someone she knew approached her vehicle. Whoever shot her was standing next to the driver's door. Her purse, wallet, and phone were all in the car. Therefore, the investigators immediately ruled out the possibility that it was a robbery. Inside the car, there were ultrasound pictures scattered around, and apparently, it was them that Ashley looked at in the last minutes of her life. She was 5 months pregnant, so the perpetrator took the life of not only Ashley, but also her son, Landon. Nothing like this had ever happened in Scott County before. Therefore, the community demanded that the police find the one who took 2 lives in such cold blood. The investigators learned from Ashley's parents that she planned to meet with Roger, the father of her child, on the day she died. They talked to Roger, and he was devastated by the death of Ashley and their unborn son. Roger admitted he and Ashley had their ups and downs. However, they were no longer a couple when Ashley found out she was pregnant. Roger was crying when he talked to the investigators. The man had no idea who could have done this to his ex-girlfriend and their unborn son. They brought him in for questioning. When asked about the events preceding Ashley's death, Roger told the investigators that they had planned to meet at a restaurant, but he had to cancel because he had other things to do. He wanted to tell Ashley not to come to Lexington, but she didn't answer her phone. He called her twice, but she didn't pick up. Therefore, Roger called her home, and Chris answered the phone. According to Roger, he asked to tell Ashley to call him back when she gets home. Roger's story matched what Chris had told the investigators about his sister's plans for that evening. When Carol found out that the police had questioned Roger, she did not believe that he could be involved in this crime. Carol said Roger was a nice guy. Their families were on good terms. When Roger had dinner at their house, he always helped clear the table. He got along well with Chris and was often at their home when he and Ashley were in a relationship. So no one believed that Roger could be the one who took the lives of Ashley and Landon. While the investigators were searching for clues in a suspect, Ashley's family tried to figure out who could have done it. Carol found a diary in her daughter's room. In it, she wrote down her experiences. Reading the diary, Carol noticed that one name kept coming up in it: Dina Williams. Dina was the same age as Ashley. They went to school together and rode the school bus together. Ashley felt sorry for Dina because she grew up in a poor family and always wore the same clothes. There were rumors that her parents treated her badly and even beat her, and Dina confirmed them in conversations with her friends. At first, Ashley and Dina were friends, but as it turned out, Dina was jealous of Ashley and wanted to have everything Ashley had, including Roger. In her diary, Ashley wrote that she and Dina had several quarrels. From this diary, Carol learned something she didn't know about. She had no idea Ashley and Dina had problems in their relationship. Therefore, Carol started suspecting that Dina Williams had something to do with Ashley's death. After Ashley and Roger broke up, Dina wasted no time and immediately began dating Roger. And perhaps Dina was worried because Ashley got pregnant with Roger's baby. After all, she didn't want to share Roger with anyone else. Dina wanted him all to herself. Maybe this could have pushed Dina to do something that cannot be undone. Carol gave Ashley's diary to the investigators so they could analyze everything written there. Carol was sure that the key to solving this case was somewhere in the pages of this diary. When the investigators reviewed Ashley's journal, they also became interested in how she described her relationship with Dina. Thus, Dina Williams was taken to the police station. She denied any involvement in what happened to Ashley. Dina worked at a bank, and according to her, they had an office party on the evening when the crime occurred. So she had an alibi. Dina did not try to hide her attitude towards Ashley from the investigators. She especially didn't like the fact that Ashley was pregnant. However, the fact that Dina did not feel anything about Ashley's death was not enough to bring any charges against her. So, the investigators let her go home after the conversation. Meanwhile, the results of the ballistic examination came in. The experts analyzed the location of Ashley's wounds, the position she was found in, and where the casings lay. The angle at which the bullets entered Ashley's body allowed them to determine the approximate height of the shooter. They believed that the perpetrator was about 5 feet and 10 inches tall. Dina Williams's height was around 5 feet and 5 inches, which meant it was unlikely that she was the one who shot Ashley. However, Dina had a twin brother, Thomas Williams, who matched the alleged height of the perpetrator. According to rumors, a few months before Ashley's death, Thomas had asked several people about how to cause a miscarriage. People also said that Thomas did everything his sister asked him to do. The investigators became interested in this and questioned Thomas Williams, but he denied everything, and there was no evidence indicating his involvement in the crime, so he was released. While the police were putting all the evidence they had together to find the culprit, residents wanted to do something to show their support to Ashley's family. They created an improvised memorial with flowers, stuffed toys, and candles. Someone brought 2 crosses, one with Ashley's name and the other with Landon's. While the investigators were looking for new evidence, Ashley's family was preparing for the funeral. It is impossible to imagine what they had to go through because they lost 2 people at once. During the autopsy, the medical examiner removed the fetus from Ashley's body. Ashley and Landon were buried in the same coffin. The fact that the one who committed this crime was still at large made the Lyons family even more devastated. For information that could help arrest the one who took their daughter's life, Ashley's parents put out a $3,000 reward that eventually went up to $5,000. People started calling the police and telling them what they thought might help the investigation. Soon after, they received a call from a woman whose house windows overlooked the park where someone shot Ashley. She reported that she may have seen the perpetrator. Standing at the window, this woman saw someone run out of the park and jump over the fence. Next, the person she saw ran up to a red pickup truck waiting for them with the engine running and got into the passenger seat. Moments later, the truck sped away. According to the witness, it was a red Chevrolet pickup truck. If the person the woman saw really had something to do with Ashley's death, then investigators had to look for not one criminal, but at least 2. After all, whoever was driving the red pickup truck could be an accomplice to the crime. Upon hearing about the red pickup truck, everyone who knew Ashley immediately realized who was behind it. Roger, her ex-boyfriend, the father of her unborn child, had such a car. The police immediately seized Roger's truck. They thoroughly searched it, but found no evidence inside. Roger refused to talk to the investigators, and there was no evidence against him. However, knowing that at least 2 people were involved in the crime, the officers made an obvious conclusion. Who didn't like Ashley? Who wasn't happy about her pregnancy? Who would be happy if Ashley disappeared? Besides Roger, there was only one person who could wish for this, and this person was Dina Williams. That's why the investigators decided to have another conversation with Dina and her brother Thomas. They questioned Thomas first. During the first conversation with the police, Thomas denied everything, but now, having learned that the eyewitness saw Roger's pickup truck at the crime scene, he became more talkative. When asked if he knew who shot Ashley Lyons, he immediately replied without hesitation that it was Roger McBeath. Thomas Williams eventually made a deal with the investigation to secure a less severe sentence for himself. He confessed that he had given Roger the gun, and Roger was the one who shot Ashley. Thomas also told the investigators that after taking Ashley's life, Roger threw the weapon in Elkhorn Creek. It took a lot of time for the police to find the crime weapon, but the 6-hour dive search was successful. The ballistics examination confirmed that the gun the police found was the weapon of the crime. The investigators knew that it wasn't Dina who shot Ashley because she didn't match the height of the perpetrator. However, they questioned her again, and she confessed that she was the getaway driver on the evening when Roger committed the crime. The police arrested Roger McBeath, Dina Williams, and her twin brother Thomas. It became clear that Roger did not want Ashley to have the baby, but Ashley was happy. She wanted to become a mother, and her family supported her decision to have this child. So Roger came up with an insidious plan. He invited Ashley to meet him and his parents at a restaurant to lure her to Scott County Park. Dina Williams drove him there, and he walked up to Ashley's car with a gun in his hand. Seeing the father of her unborn child, Ashley rolled down the window and reached into her purse to get the ultrasound pictures. She didn't expect him to shoot her. By pulling the trigger 3 times, Roger took the life of both Ashley and his own son. Then he ran out of the park, got into the pickup truck, and told Dina to hit the gas. On the way, they made a stop and got rid of the gun, throwing it into the river. When it became known who was behind this crime, the residents of Stamping Ground were shocked. They didn't expect that someone they knew would be capable of such a brutal crime. Equally frightening was the fact that several people were involved in this. Roger McBeath pleaded not guilty. In preparing for the trial of McBeath, the authorities made a mistake, ultimately influencing the verdict. But I'll tell you about this at the end of the video. As for Thomas Williams, the court sentenced him to 7 years in prison for his involvement in this crime. In the plea agreement, Williams admitted he accepted $1,000 from Roger McBeath Jr. to injure Ashley Lyons in such a way that it would cause her to miscarry. The act was never carried out, with Williams then agreeing to give McBeath the gun used in the murder, according to court records. In 2005, Dina Williams pleaded guilty. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors have recommended Williams serve a total of 20 years in prison, making her eligible for parole after she has served 85%, or 17 years of her term. During the trial, prosecutors planned to put several witnesses on the stand who claimed Williams said she wished Ashley Lyons was dead, had plotted with McBeath to poison Ashley, and had offered people $1,000 to cause Ashley to miscarry by beating her up, the court documents said. According to prosecutors, Williams and McBeath resorted to more drastic measures after their original plans failed. Williams said her attorney, public defender Rodney Barnes, told her a jury would probably have found her guilty. Williams acknowledged she took McBeath to the park the night of Ashley's murder, so he could view the ultrasound pictures of the couple's unborn son, but said she drove around the Colony subdivision while they met and later came to pick him up. She heard 3 gunshots during her drive, but at the time, she did not know what they were, Williams said. According to Williams, when leaving the park, McBeath never told her that Ashley Lyons was dead, and she never told police about what had happened for fear of what McBeath would do, saying he was abusive toward her. However, McBeath's parents, Roger Sr. and Rita, said that Williams was lying, calling her a compulsive liar who often acted in the heat of the moment. The couple said Williams was jealous of Ashley and had agreed to the plea deal to take the easy way out. In August 2005, the court sentenced Dina Williams to 20 years in prison. She was released on parole in 2021. In the written motion, Williams said she was very young and easily persuaded by her then-boyfriend McBeath. Williams also said she had no knowledge of the relationship between McBeath and Lyons. Furthermore, Williams said she was not the main offender of the crime and has already served approximately 70% of her sentence for her role in the crime. Williams noted in the court filing that she had completed various programs in prison, including courses on anger management, resident legal aid training, horticulture landscaping, and how to be a certified Braille transcriber. After his arrest, Roger pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. The jury convicted him, but he managed to get his conviction overturned by the Kentucky Supreme Court because a jail informant overstepped his bounds by questioning McBeath in jail about the shooting, and the defense was not allowed to question the informant. John Romano, a jail informant, was instructed by the police not to ask Roger McBeath questions about the crime he was accused of. The informant was allowed to have ordinary conversations with McBeath about everyday things, such as sports and movies. The police hoped McBeath would start talking about the crime himself without the leading questions. The Kentucky Supreme Court ruled prosecutors used illegally obtained evidence and overturned the verdict. In 2009, Roger was retried, and this time he pleaded guilty to complicity to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. The court then handed him a 42-year prison sentence with eligibility for parole in 16 years. The court also sentenced him to 5 years for complicity to evidence tampering, which would run concurrently with his previous sentence. McBeath's parole hearing took place in December 2023. McBeath told the parole board he was not interested in parole. McBeath said he didn't wish to continue the hearing after declining his parole eligibility. Thus, he is currently still in prison. In honor of Ashley Lyons, Scott County Park, where she died, now has the Angel Garden with ceramic angel statues. After Ashley's death, Carol and her husband, Buford Lyons, helped pass a fetal homicide law at both the state and federal levels. Under the bill, violence against a pregnant woman is considered two crimes, one against the woman and the other against her unborn child. The case of Romina Núñez several years ago literally shocked the whole of Spain with its unimaginable cruelty and cynicism. The very situation in which this unfortunate young woman found herself, we can say, typical. Her husband beat her and she kept silent, hoping that he would change. However, the denouement of this story shocked even experienced investigators who have seen everything in their practice. The victim's body was never found, only a fragment of it which the sea threw ashore. But how did it happen? And could the tragedy have been avoided? To answer these questions, you need to understand who Romina was and why she never dared to admit to anyone in what trouble she found herself. Who is Romina Núñez? Romina Celeste Núñez Rodriguez was born in the fall of 1990 in the city of Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, and was the eldest of two daughters in a poor working-class family. Parents separated when the girls were still young, so their mother, whose name was Miriam Rodriguez, had to raise the children on her own. The woman had to work several jobs at once because her ex-husband did not help them financially at all and did not show any interest in the fate of the daughters. When she was still a schoolgirl, Romina got a job in order to help her mother and younger sister somehow. At the age of 17, the girl began a romantic relationship with a guy whose name was Christopher. He wooed her beautifully. They made plans for a joint future. But happiness ended as soon as Núñez learned that she was expecting a child and reported this to her lover. The young man immediately gave the chosen one an ultimatum. Either she terminates the pregnancy or they part forever. Romina deeply hurt the words of her lover, but after consulting with her parents, with whom she has always been very close, the girl decided to keep the child. Most of all, she feared that having had an abortion at such a young age will never be able to become a mother again, so there was only one way out. Christopher kept his word. He broke off all relations with the girl and was never interested in her fate and the fate of his child. Romina, at the age of 18, gave birth to a son whom she named Lucas. However, with the advent of a baby in the family, and so deplorable financial situation worsened even more. Money is catastrophically lacking, and mother Romina had to now support and grandson moving to Spain. Romina, depressed by the situation, she wanted to somehow correct the situation and help her family. But find a decent job with good pay in Paraguay, she still could not manage. Then the girl called her maternal aunt, who lived in sunny Spain, and the relative invited her niece to her place, assuring her that it would be easier for her too, and that there were more prospects in Europe than in Latin America. Not thinking long, the girl packed only the most necessary things, and having earned an airplane ticket to Spain, went on the road. She left her 2-year-old son in the care of her mother and sister for a while, deciding that she would pick him up as soon as she found a new place to live and a stable job. In the late summer of 2010, Romina flew to Madrid and from there traveled to its suburbs, the provincial town of Alcobendas, where she settled in the house of her aunt. Romina immediately actively began to look for work, and she smiled at her luck. Attractive and sociable beauty got a job as an administrator in a hotel, where she received a decent salary. Part of the money she sent home, and for the rest rented a separate apartment, so as not to embarrass hospitable relatives. Soon Núñez met a man named Javier, with whom she had a stormy romance. The favorite a few years ago, just like her, emigrated to Europe in search of happiness and a better life. He was a native of the Republic of El Salvador, worked in construction, and seemed to be a serious man. However, when the girl became pregnant, the situation repeated itself. Javier was not ready for the appearance of children, but nevertheless, the couple tried to live together for a while. Unfortunately, soon after the birth of their common son, they finally broke up. The girl was again in a difficult situation because she was in a foreign country with an infant in her arms and simply did not know how to be further. For a while she returned to her aunt's house, where she was accepted and helped in every way possible. When the boy was only about 6 months old, the young mother went back to work because she could not work. But a few months later, a new shock awaited the girl. For a long time, she ignored the poor health and weakness, writing it off to stress and fatigue. However, when Romina still went to the doctor, she was diagnosed with cancer. The young woman underwent several courses of chemotherapy, lost her hair, lost a lot of weight, but overcame the insidious disease. After treatment, the girl quickly recovered. she continued to work and hid the lack of hair with the help of wigs. Romina believed that the hard trials, which she managed to steadfastly overcome, will certainly be followed by a period of happiness. She saved money and planned to take not only her eldest son, but also her mother and sister to Spain. New lover in the summer of 2017. At an event where Núñez went in the company of friends, she accidentally met a man named Raúl Díaz-Chicón. He was good-looking, able to impress others, had a serious job, and was financially secure. He liked the smiling beauty, and he became interested in her, asking mutual acquaintances. Romina also liked this statuesque beauty, and when he soon asked her out on a date, she gladly agreed. Raúl was almost 15 years older than Romina, and he worked as a process engineer for a large energy company. He had a couple of failed marriages under his belt, and had 2 teenage daughters from previous relationships. But the girl was not intimidated by the age difference at all. As for her personal life, she had a similar situation, with the only difference being that she was raising sons from 2 failed previous affairs. It only took one date for the couple to realize that they were in love, and they didn't want it with each other anymore. Romina, overwhelmed by her new feelings, literally fluttered around, telling her friends how happy she was. Her new lover gave her small gifts and pleasant surprises almost every day. He arranged romantic dates, sent flowers with touching cards, and said compliments. Romina believed that she had finally met her true love and found a man who would accept her and her sons. However, soon the girl began to reach very unpleasant rumors about her chosen one. In particular, it was said that he was rude and even cruel with his previous spouses, and because of this, in fact, broke up both his marriages. But Núñez did not want to believe it, although she drew attention to the fact that Raúl did not maintain any relations not only with his former wives, but also with his daughters. However, a significant difference in age and the presence of heirs from previous relationships on both sides did not become an obstacle for the lovers. Just 6 months after meeting, they decided to live together and settled in a luxurious villa on the island of Lanzarote, part of the Canary Islands. This place seemed to the girl a real paradise, but her happiness lasted only a short time, from a dream man to a domestic tyrant. First-time lovers lived in threes, along with Romina's youngest son. Raúl tried to treat the child well, and the girl even thought that he would be an ideal father for her boys. She herself, Raúl, promised a long and happy life together, in which she would not need anything, and he would fully provide for her and the children. The girl in love believed the words of the chosen one, and when he offered her to become his lawful wedded wife, without hesitation agreed. But only Raúl insisted that they need time for 2, so that they could be alone and enjoy each other's company in full after the wedding. In fact, he not only did not want to take Romina's eldest child from Paraguay, but also dreamed of getting rid of her youngest son. However, the young mother believed her lover and did not listen to what her friends told her, who noted the strange behavior of the man. In June 2018, Chacón bought for the bride and her child tickets to Paraguay, and 1 return ticket just for Romina. When the girl flew home and told her mother and sister about her chosen one, the women were somewhat confused by Raúl's behavior. They doubted the sincerity of his intentions and assumed that he just wanted to get rid of someone else's child in his house. But the girl was offended by such talk, and she even had a little quarrel with her loved ones. A few days later, she flew back to Spain, promising that in the fall she would fly back for the boys. When Romina returned, a warm welcome awaited her, and for 2 months, she was perfectly happy alone with Raúl. However, in August, just a few days before the wedding, a man brutally beat Romina. This incident was a real shock to her, but the groom literally on his knees begged her forgiveness, promised that such a thing will never happen again, and she believed him. Núñez did not file a police report on her lover, and did not tell anyone about what happened. And on August 10th, making up bruises on her face, she went to the wedding with the man who would soon take her life in cold blood. One last trip home 2 weeks after the wedding, the girl flew back home to Paraguay, not to pick up her sons as she had planned earlier, but just to see her family. Her mother and sister were quite puzzled by the changes that had happened to her in the short time they had not seen each other. Romina looked upset and even lost. She had a noticeable limp, and there were bruises on her neck, which she tried to hide with a scarf. To all questions, Romina either kept silent or claimed that she had accidentally injured herself. Romina spent almost a month at home, which also surprised her relatives as she had just gotten married. However, the newly married wife said that her spouse himself suggested that she visit the children because she had not seen them for a long time and missed them very much. Then Miriam even praised her son-in-law for his generosity. But still the woman did not understand what was going on and why her daughter looked so unhappy. In mid-September, Romina, secretly from her mother, borrowed money from relatives for a return ticket to Spain because her husband simply refused to pay for her return. This should have been a clear signal that flying back was not worth it, but Núñez still hoped that everything would work out and the marriage would be happy. On September 17th at the airport, her mother, sister, and son saw her for the last time. The mysterious disappearance of a mother of 2 children. Since returning to her husband, Romina's life every day more and more resembled a terrible dream. Raúl, as it turned out, used illegal substances, and now he stopped hiding his addiction from his chosen one. Being under the influence of illegal substances, he turned into a real beast and literally tortured his wife. But every time she tried to leave him, the man promised to stop and swore that this would not happen again. Usually after the beatings and threats, there was a temporary lull when the husband became loving and caring again, gave gifts, and arranged romantic dates. But such periods became shorter and shorter, and scandals with manhandling occurred more and more often. Shortly before the Romina confessed to her best friend that she is afraid of her husband and believes that one day he may kill her. On December 29th, Raúl again beat his wife, so much so that she was forced to seek medical help. The hospital suspected something wrong and wanted to call the police to record the fact of beating, but at that moment her husband appeared in the department and said that Romina had fallen herself, and there was no need to involve law enforcers. The girl only confirmed his words and, refusing hospitalization, went home. On January 1st, 2019, Miriam, Romina's mother, tried to call her daughter several times, but she did not pick up the phone. Then the woman dialed her spouse's number to find out what was wrong, but there was no answer either. After several days of silence, the mother-in-law sent Raúl a message in which she wrote that she was going to go to the police. This time the son-in-law reacted instantly and called back, saying that he and Romina quarreled on December 31st, after which she packed her things and left him. The man assured that everything is fine, soon the wife will cool down and return, because before, according to him, this has already happened. But Romina's mother was not convinced by the words of her son-in-law. She felt that something had happened to her daughter and insisted that Raúl went to the police. Only on January 8th, under pressure from relatives of the wife, Raúl still filed a report on the disappearance of his wife. However, this time he told a slightly different story, adding that after the quarrel, his wife had taken his money, and he thought that Romina might have flown to Paraguay to visit the children. So he was not particularly worried until his mother-in-law called him yesterday. What is Raúl hiding? Raúl was constantly confused in his testimony and contradicted himself, which caused a lot of questions and suspicions. Then the law enforcers seriously decided to take him seriously, as well as to find out how the couple's life had been. Having questioned friends and relatives, they realized that not everything was not smooth in this marriage. Romina repeatedly complained to loved ones about her husband's abuse, but never went into details, and others often noticed bruises and abrasions on her body. It was decided to put Ciccone under secret surveillance, and all his telephone conversations were tapped. But the man seemed to sense that he was being watched, and for a long time behaved extremely cautiously, not giving any clues or reasons to suspect himself of anything. Nevertheless, the investigation continued, and soon it became known about the visit of Núñez to the hospital on December 29th with signs of serious beatings, and how her husband almost forcibly took her away from there, forbidding her to go to the police. And a few months earlier, Romina did file a domestic violence report, but withdrew it the next day. A week later, Raúl calmed down a bit, and in a telephone conversation with his relative, who worked in the police, blurted out that his wife was no longer alive, but her body would never be found. This was a good reason for the man's arrest as the main suspect in the case, and his detailed interrogation at the station. The suspect's version of events, according to Raúl, his wife had had too much to drink on New Year's Eve and began to scandalize him, demanding that he immediately move her children into their home, and when he said he was not ready for that, she threw a tantrum, started fighting and throwing at him everything she could get her hands on. Then the man allegedly left the house for a couple hours until everything settled down, and when he returned, he found Romina in the bathtub without signs of life. According to his version, the woman suffocated because she was very drunk, but he was afraid that he might be suspected of involvement in her death or even accused of murder. So Raúl decided to remove all traces and then report her disappearance. but the way he admitted he had disposed of the body shocked everyone. Sikkim said that he decided to burn the woman's body on a barbecue in the courtyard, and since they lived in a luxury complex with a large surrounding area, the neighbors could not see what he was doing outside his house, and could not smell the odor produced by the burning of human flesh. However, Raoul miscalculated because the barbecue did not work on the principle of a crematorium, and in a few hours the remains were not burned. Then he took them out of the fire, divided into parts, packed in different bags, and a couple of days later rented a car, which took the dismembered body in the wild and deserted part of the island, where he threw into the sea from the rocks. The search for the body and evidence police spent weeks combing the shoreline in and around the areas where Raoul said he dumped bags of his wife's remains. Divers were also involved in the search for body fragments on the bottom, aviation, and a considerable number of volunteers. But all efforts did not bring any results. Meanwhile, on January 16th, Romina's husband was formally charged with domestic violence, as well as the murder of his wife. This came after his home was thoroughly searched using specialized equipment and luminol, which revealed numerous washed-up traces of blood in various rooms. It was also found that the man had been ordering caustic soda, used to remove organic contaminants, and paint from the internet. As it turned out, in one of the rooms on the second floor, he was so thoroughly mopping up a bloody stain on the flooring that he damaged it and decided to paint over it. According to the version of the investigation, it was in this room that the suspect dismembered the body of his spouse. Moreover, there on the floor was found a broken fragment of Romina's fingernail with traces of blood and Raoul's epithelium, which could indicate that the victim was alive and resisted. Also in the bathroom, on the tiles on the wall, they found Romina's contact lens stuck on the wall, which could have gotten there from a strong blow to the face. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, law enforcers were unable to find any remains. But at this point, the station received a call from a tourist who reported that a lung fragment had been thrown onto the beach. He could not say with certainty whether it belonged to a human or an animal, but having heard that a body was being searched for on the coast, decided to report his find to the police. Toward the end of February, an expert examination confirmed that the lung fragment found belonged to the missing Romina. Trial and conviction despite the evidence found and the results of the examination, Raoul continued to insist on his innocence. He stuck to his initial theory that the woman had drowned herself in the bathtub while highly intoxicated. Although evidence found in the house indicated a fierce struggle, the man also said he did not use any implements or tools to dismember the body. He allegedly tried to burn it completely on a barbecue, and afterwards the remains, due to prolonged exposure to the fire, fell apart on their own, and he just put them in bags and took them away. Such a claim was untrue for several reasons. First, the body of the adult Romina could not have been placed on the fixture in his yard. Secondly, even after prolonged exposure to such temperatures, the bones could not become so fragile that they could fall apart without the use of tools. And in order to separate the lung from the body, it was necessary to open the chest, which could not be done with bare hands. The investigation failed to establish how exactly Raoul took the life of his wife, but judging by the traces of struggle found in the house, it was suggested that he could beat her to death. There was also no doubt that Ciccone had dismembered her body in the very room, where he later had to repaint the floor to cover the bloody traces. Raoul's trial was delayed by the COVID pandemic, so the sessions were repeatedly postponed and rescheduled. During this time, Raoul changed several lawyers, and under pressure of evidence, he did admit that he had accidentally killed his wife during a scuffle, rather than finding her dead in the bathtub as he had previously claimed. Nevertheless, he continued to insist that she was drunk and violent. It was not until June 2023 that the defendant was finally found guilty, except that the sentence Romina's loved ones considered too lenient. The man was sentenced to 12.5 years for involuntary manslaughter, 2 years for proven domestic violence, 1 year for causing serious bodily harm in December 2018 when Romina went to the hospital, as well as several months for abuse of the body. The case of Ariel Castro, the monster from Cleveland, and his captives, is a striking example of brutal criminals hiding behind the facade of normalcy. Maniacs like Castro often appear as good, law-abiding citizens, fooling neighbors, friends, colleagues, and even close relatives who are unaware of their double lives. Unlike many, Ariel Castro was never a model family man or worker. He was a tyrant to his wife, who chose to stay silent about her suffering. Thus, people around them sincerely viewed Ariel as a good-natured, friendly, and helpful neighbor. This perception shattered in the spring of 2013, when the world learned about the Cleveland monster, who had kept 3 girls captive in his home for 10 years. The revelation shook the country, particularly shocking the local residents, as the missing girls were from the same neighborhood and trusted Castro enough to accept rides from him. Remarkably, Castro even participated in the search efforts for his victims, becoming a volunteer, yet no one suspected him. Let's delve into how this criminal managed to stay hidden in plain sight, continue kidnapping girls, and evade detection. Ariel Rodriguez Castro was born on July 10, 1960 in Yauco, Puerto Rico, as the third of 4 children in a poor family. His parents, Liliana Rodriguez and Pedro Castro, constantly fought and eventually divorced before Ariel started school, leaving his mother to care for him and his siblings O'Neill, Pedro, and Bonita. Struggling to make ends meet, the family moved to Reading, Pennsylvania in southeastern USA. However, they soon moved to the neighboring state of Ohio, finally settling in Cleveland, a city that at the time welcomed migrants from Latin American countries. Pedro Castro also moved to Cleveland with his new wife and their joint children, settling nearby so the children from his first marriage could freely communicate with their father, which Liliana never forbade. Although their father willingly contacted his older children, he never helped them financially. Liliana later remarried, giving Ariel 4 more siblings. Ariel attended Lincoln West High School in Cleveland, graduating in 1978. He studied music and regularly attended church with his family, presenting as a model Christian, but was a domestic tyrant. In his teens, Ariel met a girl named Grimilda Figueroa, whose family lived across the street. They attended the same school, quickly became friends, and later developed a romantic relationship. For a long time, they lived with their parents because they couldn't afford their own place. In the early 1990s, after saving enough money, the couple moved into a house on Seymour Avenue in southwest Cleveland. This 2-story building, erected in 1890 and later reconstructed, had 4 bedrooms, a dining room, 1 bathroom, and a large, unfinished basement. According to Grimilda's sister, Alida Caballo, Grimilda complained that her life became a nightmare after moving into the new house. Ariel regularly abused her, both physically and emotionally. Grimilda believed things would improve after marriage and children, but the abuse worsened. She hid bruises and abrasions under her clothes, blaming visible injuries on clumsiness. In 1993, Ariel beat Grimilda so severely that she needed medical attention. Grimilda suffered fractured ribs, a broken nose, and broken arms after being pushed down the stairs by her husband. Despite her severe injuries, she refused to file a police report, and the incident was hushed up. After receiving medical attention, she returned to her abusive husband. Ariel remained quiet for a while, fearing police attention, but soon realized he could get away with it and continued to beat his wife. In the mid-1990s, he inflicted a head injury that caused a blood clot and an inoperable tumor. Ariel was arrested but released a day later, as Grimilda did not press charges and even requested his release. By the late 1990s, Grimilda, tired of the abuse, filed for divorce, secured custody of their 4 children, Arlene, Antonio, Angie, and Amelia, and moved out. Her nightmare continued as her ex-husband pursued, blackmailed, and threatened her. Grimilda sought a restraining order, which was issued 3 times but revoked each time. She passed away in late April 2012 from complications related to the brain tumor. By then, her children were grown and independent, but maintained a warm relationship with their father. In the early 2000s, Ariel lived alone on Seymour Avenue, worked as a school bus driver, played guitar at city festivals, and was known as a good-natured, hospitable neighbor. Nevertheless, there were oddities in Castro's behavior that went unnoticed. For instance, he was prosecuted several times for traffic violations, including speeding and making dangerous U-turns while driving a school bus. These infractions led to fines and a suspension, culminating in his firing in early 2013 after a maneuver endangered his passengers. Ariel frequently changed musical groups due to tardiness and disrupting rehearsals and concerts. After separating from his wife, he never invited anyone inside his house, though he regularly hosted backyard barbecues. His strangeness did not raise concern. He was seen as eccentric but harmless. No one could have guessed the danger behind his friendly facade. His first victim was Michelle Knight. On August 23, 2002, Ariel decided to kidnap and imprison her. Michelle, born on April 23, 1981 in Cleveland, had a troubled youth, often ran away from home, and had a police record. She became a mother early, but lost custody of her son, who was in a shelter. On that fateful day, she was on her way to court to regain custody of her 2-year-old. Ariel, whom she knew as her neighbor and a school bus driver, offered her a ride. He mentioned having puppies at home and invited her to help find them homes, trusting him. Michelle agreed, but upon entering his house, the kind man turned into a monster. He severely beat and assaulted her, then chained her in the basement. For days he starved her, deprived her of water, and repeatedly abused her. She was unable to move and begged for her release, promising silence. When Michelle's reported her missing, the police did not prioritize her case. Years later, after the terrible truth came to light, police officers admitted that Michelle Knight's case was not a priority, and limited resources were allocated to the investigation. Firstly, Knight was an adult. Secondly, she had previously left home multiple times. Thirdly, she had legal issues. Most importantly, authorities believed she was avoiding court proceedings related to her son's custody. Michelle's relatives tried to find her through their own efforts, involving neighbors, friends, and anyone concerned. At one point, Ariel Castro even helped post flyers with Michelle's photo around the city, all while she remained a prisoner in his basement. The second victim was Amanda Berry. Castro, convinced he was beyond suspicion, decided to kidnap again in spring 2003. Amanda, born on April 22, 1986, was about to celebrate her 17th birthday, but mysteriously disappeared on April 21, 2003. She was working as a waitress and called home after her shift, promising to be there soon. However, Amanda never arrived, and neither did she appear in the following days, months, or years. As Amanda left the restaurant and headed for the bus stop, Ariel drove up with a seemingly harmless offer of a ride home. Since she had been in the same class as his son for several years, she trusted him and accepted. On the way, he deceived her into entering his house, where he brutally beat her and dragged her to the basement, where Michelle had been held captive for months. Amanda faced the same horrific fate, beaten and starved for several days. This time, he chose 14-year-old Georgina Linda Jesus, who was in the same class as his daughter Arlene, and was her best friend. On April 2, 2004, two girls walked out of school together, talked for a while, and then each went to their homes. On the corner of West 105th Street, Gina met Ariel, who promised to take her home. She knew him since childhood, was her best friend's father, so without hesitation she got into his car immediately. Even though it was daytime and no one witnessed the kidnapping, the streets were empty. When it became known that Gina was missing, there was no warning to Amber, making her parents angry. The story aired on the Fox television show, America's Most Wanted, rerun 2 more times in 2005 and 2006. The disappearance was linked to Amanda's kidnapping a year earlier in September. But Castro remained unsuspected. Despite this, he voluntarily participated in the search for the missing girls. He treated Gina like the other victims, keeping them imprisoned in his home. Although a passerby saw a middle-aged Hispanic man, and a sketch resembling Castro was drawn, he was never a suspect. For over 10 years, he regularly beat, abused, and starved his victims to mentally break them down, punishing any disobedience or escape attempts to prevent thoughts of death. Running away. Michelle, the first and oldest victim, suffered the most, undergoing public beatings to intimidate others. Finally, he moved them from the dark basement to a second-floor room with a view of the backyard. Knight recalls that she became pregnant by her abuser at least 5 times during her incarceration. However, each time it became obvious Ariel terminated the pregnancy in the most brutal way. He starved the girl and kicked her in the stomach until she miscarried. After one of these tortures, she almost died due to severe bleeding. But even then, the kidnapper remained indifferent and did not allow calling an ambulance. The girls were allowed to take a shower no more than once a week, and that as a reward for good behavior. Instead of a toilet, they had a garden bucket, which Castro very rarely and reluctantly took out. The criminal fed the captives no more than once a day, but continued to beat and use them regularly. One day he gave the girls a puppy, but a week later, he brutally killed the dog in front of them as punishment for Michelle's disobedience. Gina, during the years of confinement, has never been pregnant. But Amanda in 2006 realized that she was expecting a child, and with horror, imagined how Ariel would beat her to provoke a miscarriage. This time, however, the man was even happy about it, allowed her to carry the baby, and he bought himself an inflatable pool specifically for childbirth. In December 2006, Amanda gave birth to a daughter who was named Jocelyn. The child was born weak, but still survived. The appearance of the baby is very close to the girls, who were now immersed in caring for him, and a little abstracted from the situation in which they were. In addition, Castro softened considerably after the birth of his daughter, and began to pamper the captives with small gifts, and sometimes allowed them to go out with the child for walks in the courtyard, but always under his strict supervision. As Jocelyn grew older, Ariel even sometimes took her to visit her mother, to whom he told her that she was his daughter born out of wedlock. The girl developed appropriately for her age. She articulated herself adeptly, a skill instilled by her mother's tutelage in literacy and numeracy. Outwardly, the child bore the hallmarks of robust health, appearing well-nourished and impeccably groomed. Despite enduring years of captivity, under the unyielding control of their tormentor, the girls clung steadfastly to the flickering flame of hope for freedom. Infrequent attempts at escape were made, though each endeavor exacted a heavy toll upon them. Cruyff and Ariel, confident in their ability to preempt their every move, faltered fatally on May 6, 2013. Amanda seized the fleeting chance when an unlocked door beckoned, frantically alerting a passing neighbor by pounding and shrieking at a window. Though initially perplexed, the neighbor's intuition was roused, prompting swift action and summoning law enforcement to the scene. Amanda divulged her identity and unmasked the presence of two other captives, Michelle and Gina. After enduring a decade of captivity, all three were emancipated and promptly hospitalized. While Amanda and Gina exhibited no discernible health concerns, Michelle bore the heavy burden of severe physical and trauma. Deafness plagued one ear, vision was severely impaired, and a litany of untreated fractures necessitated extensive reconstructive surgery. Furthermore, the scourge of abuse-induced complications left her forever robbed of the chance of motherhood. Suspicions of complicity led to the detention of his siblings, O'Neill and Pedro, both frequent visitors to his domain. In due course, the men found themselves swiftly released. On the other hand, Castro faced a litany of charges, including kidnapping, abuse, assault, forced imprisonment, and the heinous act of terminating 5 unborn lives. While the legal ramifications of these charges could have sentenced him to life behind bars, the prosecution aimed for the ultimate punishment, the death penalty, branding Castro as the Cleveland Monster. However, a surprising twist unfolded as Castro opted to collaborate with the investigation, confessing his guilt and recounting the harrowing events in exchange for a commutation of the death penalty to life imprisonment. In his chilling narratives, he meticulously detailed the days of abduction and the subsequent torment inflicted upon his victims, all the while deflecting responsibility onto the very individuals he subjected to such horrors. August 1, 2013 marked the culmination of legal proceedings, with Castro sentenced to spend the remainder of his days incarcerated without the possibility of parole. Yet, his parting words echoed with a mix of remorse and denial as he tendered an apology to his victims, claiming affliction rather than culpability, and casting blame upon law enforcement for their purported ineptitude in failing to uncover the atrocities transpiring right under their noses. Castro's residence met its end on August 7, 2013, reduced to rubble in a symbolic act of closure. The solemn occasion was attended solely by the kin of Michelle Knight and Gina De Jesus, with other participants of the nightmarish ordeal choosing to abstain, unwilling to revisit the site that had served as the backdrop for their unimaginable anguish. Nevertheless, amidst the rubble emerged a glimmer of hope, as on July 9, 2013 night, Barry and De Jesus released a joint video expressing profound gratitude to the public for their unwavering support throughout their journey toward reclaiming their lives. It was their only joint statement after which, despite the years spent together in confinement, the girls chose never to speak to each other again. The maniac was transferred to a correctional center in Orient, Ohio, after his conviction and placed under special supervision. But on September 3, 2013, just a month after he began serving his life sentence, the Cleveland Monster was found hanging from a sheet in his prison cell. All attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. He was 53 years old at the time of his death. Michelle Knight, after her release, preferred to change her name and place of residence. She did not give interviews, but a few years later published a book in which she recounted all the horrors she had experienced in the Castro home. Her child was adopted after his mother disappeared. The woman later tracked down his adoptive parents, but it is not known whether she was able to establish contact with her now adult son. Barry and DeJesus received diplomas from John Marshall High School in 2015 because they never had time to graduate. Gina later volunteered on the Amber Alert Committee, and Barry joined Fox affiliate WJW in Cleveland in 2017, where she hosts a missing persons column. Castro family members disowned Ariel, condemned his actions, and apologized to his victims and their families. The perpetrator's eldest daughter, Amelia, is now serving a 25-year prison sentence for assault and attempting to take a man's life. His youngest daughter, Arlene, apologized to former best friend Gina for the way her father treated her. Castro's son, Antonio, said he had been to his father's house and saw that some rooms were locked and inaccessible, but his parent explained it was because he was saving money on heating. In 2018, Michelle published a book titled Life After Darkness, Finding Healing and Happiness After the Cleveland Kidnappings. DeJesus also wrote a book of memoirs titled Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland. There have also been numerous documentary projects and 2 feature films about those horrific events, Prisoners of Cleveland, which was released in 2015, and Kidnapped in Cleveland, which was released in 2021. Ariel Castro's case is one most horrifying cases in American criminal history. Castro was convicted of kidnapping, holding and sexually abusing 3 women for more than a decade in his home. Castro kidnapped Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight at his home in the Tremont section of Cleveland. He kept them in terrible conditions, imprisoned in small rooms, and subjected to physical and mental torture. Finally, Berry managed to escape captivity by banging on the door and calling for help. She and the baby girl she gave birth to in captivity were rescued, along with DeJesus and Knight. When the police arrived, they discovered the brutal tragedy that Castro had caused. Castro was later arrested and convicted of a series of crimes, including rape, illegal arrest, and unresolved murder. He received a sentence of life in prison plus 1,000 years. However, he committed suicide in prison in September 2013, just 2 months after his arrest. This case caused a stir and sparked special interest in the issue of domestic violence and human rights protection. Hello friends, today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in the small town of San Cristobal, Verapaz. Her family was simple and modest. Her parents were Amarils and Brian Lopez. Luz Maria was the youngest of 2 children. She grew up with her older brother, Omar. As an infant, she faced a life-threatening intestinal obstruction. To save her, doctors performed a complex operation without guarantees of success. Her mother prayed fervently for her recovery and firmly believed that her daughter would pull through, and she did. The surgery at such an early age did not impact Luz Maria's development. Throughout her school years, Luz Maria actively engaged in sports, especially gymnastics and athletics. She also had a passion for classical choreography. Her creative nature made it easy for her to communicate and connect with different people, quickly forming friendships. Academically inclined towards the humanities, she excelled in her studies. After finishing school, Luz Maria contemplated higher education and opted for a prestigious state university. She decided to law degree and later specialized in criminalistics due to her genuine interest in this field. A significant moment occurred during her student years when Luz Maria and her mother visited a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. It was Omar's 25th birthday that year, and they wanted to gift him something special, a motorcycle he had always dreamed of. At the showroom, a polite and attentive young consultant named Jorge welcomed them. He showed them various models and provided recommendations. Mother and daughter chose a model, but wanted to consult with the head of the family before finalizing their decision. They left with a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria's phone number for future reference. Soon after, Jorge called Luz Maria, not about the motorcycle, but on a more personal note. Over time, these calls became frequent until Jorge mustered the courage to ask her out for coffee. It was clear that he had a strong attraction to the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he was unsure how to initiate their acquaintance. Luz Maria also found this handsome young man appealing. When he proposed they meet, she agreed readily. Although the young man was a year younger than her, this slight difference didn't hinder their growing connection. Their romantic relationship blossomed almost immediately. Both felt it was love at first sight and believed in a future filled with happiness together. After only a few months, the couple chose to live together despite their parents' disapproval of such haste. Soon after, they were married. Approximately 6 months later, they held a wedding ceremony, inviting only their closest friends and family to celebrate with them. However, issues arose on the day of the wedding. The banquet venue encountered a problem which almost disrupted the entire event. The couple had to pay a significant additional amount to ensure the celebration proceeded as planned. Little is known about Jorge, Luz Maria's chosen partner. Born in 1996 in Santa Catalina Latina in central Guatemala, Jorge was the eldest of 2 sons and grew up with his brother Pablo. Their family often faced financial hardships, balancing on the edge of poverty. Thus, there wasn't enough money for luxurious clothes or expensive toys. It barely covered necessities. Despite these challenges, Jorge lacked aspirations for a life and didn't focus on studying or securing a decent job. People who knew Jorge personally described him as withdrawn, and sometimes even aggressive due to his trouble controlling emotions. Consequently, he didn't have many friends and struggled with relationships. Nonetheless, meeting his dream girl sparked determination within him. He worked hard to win her love and hurried to marry her out of fear she might change her mind. It's worth mentioning that Luz Maria's parents were skeptical about their son-in-law right from the beginning. Overall, despite some initial challenges and doubts from others around them, their connection remained strong and unwavering. Something about this young man didn't sit right with them. They couldn't pinpoint it, and they couldn't convince their daughter not to marry him. Soon after the wedding, she became pregnant. Without a university degree, finding a good job was tough. Employers didn't want to hire someone inexperienced and expecting a baby, so she had to settle odd jobs. Her husband, by that time, had lost his job too and wasn't eager to find a new one. When their daughter Alice was born, money became really tight. With both of them unemployed, they struggled to pay rent or even buy food and basic necessities. Then Jorge suggested moving in with his parents temporarily. Luz Maria Lopez resisted for a long while but eventually agreed. They couldn't stay on the streets with a baby. Luz Maria Lopez's mother was aware of her daughter's family issues and often urged her to come back home. But Luz Maria Lopez kept saying things would get better with her husband, and there was no need to worry. One day, the mother decided to visit her daughter and granddaughter at her son-in-law's parents' house and found a distressing scene. Luz Maria Lopez was in terrible shape, eating just once a day, and that too very little. However, Jorge's family didn't see the need to provide for their unemployed daughter-in-law. It's terrible. Luz Maria Lopez was breastfeeding Alice, so lack of proper nutrition threatened both their healths. But inadequate meals were only part of the myriad problems she faced in her mother-in-law's home, as she later discovered. She was constantly humiliated and even beaten by her husband's younger brother. He was irritated by the crying of the child and the presence of items in the house. His frustration him to repeatedly throw these items at Maria. On one occasion, he launched a baby bottle that struck little Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge witnessed all of this, but never once stood up for his wife and daughter, acting as if they were strangers to him. Maria's mother persuaded her to take her granddaughter and return to the parents' house. Soon after, Jorge appeared at their doorstep, asking his wife to come back, promising he would find employment. She agreed, but only on the condition that they would rent an apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. When Maria successfully defended her diploma, she fulfilled a long-time dream by securing a job with the city prosecutor's office. A smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began moving up the career ladder. Over time, the family's financial situation improved considerably. They could even afford to buy a car for 2. However, this improvement was solely due to Maria's diligent work and reputation. Jorge was still searching for himself and preferred living at his wife's expense. He was jealous, lazy, and a domestic type with an explosive temper, which worsened over time. Jorge did not want to work, taking only temporary part-time jobs, if at all. He preferred sitting at home in front of the TV, drinking beer with friends, and spending what his wife earned. Moreover, Jorge was pathologically jealous and tried to control every move of his beloved. He did not permit her to make friends or have lunch with colleagues or just be somewhere without him. Constantly checking her phone records and reading messages became routine for him. He also forbade her from registering accounts on social networks. At home, when left alone with Maria, Jorge's behavior did not improve in any way. He often created scandals in seemingly calm places, constantly clarified his relationships, and blamed his wife for any problems or family troubles. When they lived at his parents' house, Jorge never stood up for his wife. He just watched as she was humiliated, insulted, and occasionally even beaten by his relatives. Jorge himself also sometimes resorted to violence and didn't see anything wrong with it. He treated Luz Maria as if she were his property, believing she would endure everything and wouldn't leave him. Neighbors frequently heard screams from their home and saw signs of beatings on the young woman's face and body. Luz Maria repeatedly tried to leave her husband and considered filing for divorce. Several times she took her daughter and moved out to live with her parents. However, each time her husband would go there, literally begging on his knees for forgiveness. Remarkably, each time Luz Maria forgave him and gave him another chance despite her parents urging her to come to her senses and leave the abusive man. On December 15, 2020, after another violent altercation with Jorge, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter Alice, got into the car in tears, and went to her mother's house. The following day, Jorge arrived there. His intentions were unclear, whether he wanted his or simply the car. He claimed he had found a job and assured everyone that their lives would change. Additionally, he promised never to raise a hand against his wife again. Surprisingly, Luz Maria believed him yet again and returned with him to their rented apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother to complain that not only did Jorge fail to secure a job as promised, but had also stolen the money she earned, effectively leaving the family destitute. Her mother felt sorry for her daughter and offered financial help so they could get by until the next salary was received. The women agreed to meet on the morning of January 19th, but Luz Maria did not arrive at the designated time. She decided to visit her workplace the next day. Upon arrival, she discovered that Luz Maria Lopez hadn't shown up for 2 days, and no one had been able to contact her. At the same time, Jorge, also searching for his wife, appeared at the prosecutor's office. He mentioned that they had argued again, and thought Luz Maria Lopez had gone to her mother's house. He figured she wasn't answering because she was upset with him. The concerned mother immediately felt something was wrong, and suspected her son-in-law might be lying. She went straight to the police to initiate a search for Luz Maria Lopez without delay. That same day, an alert system named Isabel Claudina, originally Alerta Isabel Claudina, was activated nationwide. This emergency system was triggered for young women reported missing. When the extensive search began, Luz Maria Lopez's husband was quickly identified as the prime suspect, though it would actually be more accurate to say he was the only suspect. Luz Maria Lopez had no known enemies or reasons someone would kidnap her, and Jorge was the last person seen with her alive. Naturally, he denied any involvement in her disappearance, asserting that he himself was distraught over her absence and irritated by being labeled as the main suspect. Despite his denials, Jorge repeatedly contradicted himself during questioning, and failed to provide a clear explanation as to why he hadn't informed the police on the actual day of his wife's disappearance. He claimed he believed she was at his mother-in-law's home, but didn't call or visit there. While law enforcement searched for witnesses and combed through areas for any clues, a breakthrough came on January 22nd. Municipal workers accidentally discovered Luz Maria Lopez's body while responding to a call about a clogged storm drain near a road. Upon lifting the grate to access the drain, they found an unusual large plastic bag containing something black inside. Upon closer inspection, the observers were horrified to discover charred human remains. They promptly reported this gruesome finding to the authorities. Upon arrival, the police officers speculated that the body might belong to Luz Maria Lopez, who was widely looking for after nationwide. Forensic experts later verified that the remains were indeed those of a young woman. Her parents and brother, despite the severe disfigurement caused by the fire, confirmed her identity with certainty. What's coincident is that the package containing her remains was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where she had worked. This location lacked surveillance cameras and lighting. Despite how badly burned the body was, pathologists determined that she had been severely beaten before death. The cause of death was asphyxia, indicated by internal hemorrhages, multiple fractures sustained while she was still alive, and particles of dried blood in her nose and mouth. Additionally, there were deep marks on her neck, pointing to strangulation. At the time of discovery, no new suspects had emerged in the investigation. The victim's parents firmly believed that their son-in-law had brutally murdered their daughter. Consequently, Jorge was taken into custody while authorities examined his motive for committing such a heinous act. In addition to the investigation, psychologists and criminal analysts needed to scrutinize the marriage and family dynamics closely. During these proceedings, Ms. Lopez submitted a disturbing audio recording sent anonymously by a neighbor familiar with her household. This person had frequently witnessed domestic disputes between Luz Maria and her husband, but decided to record one such incident without realizing it would culminate in murder. The audio captured Luz Maria desperately crying for help, amid little sobs in the background. Ms. Lopez was horrified by what she heard, and lamented that if this witness had alerted authorities earlier, her daughter might still be alive today. The individual who captured the recording did not contact the police, nor did they visit the residence from which the distressing screams emanated. The authorities were unable to trace this anonymous person, making it impossible to involve them as a witness in the investigation. Consequently, the audio recording was included in the criminal materials. A key witness gave a detailed interview urging all citizens to stay vigilant and report incidents of domestic violence to the police, rather than merely documenting them with devices such as cameras. This approach, she stated, could potentially save lives. This crime triggered significant public outrage, prompting thousands to take to the streets in protest, demanding that the perpetrator be brought to justice. Jorge was promptly taken into custody, but persistently denied any wrongdoing. He claimed he personally drove his wife to work on that ill-fated day, when she subsequently vanished. Street CCTV footage indeed captured their vehicle heading towards Luz Maria Lopez's workplace that morning. However, due to tinted windows, it was indiscernible how many individuals were inside. None of the video clips showed the car stopping or Luz Maria exiting. Further discoveries were uncovered at the couple's rented home, where faint traces of clean blood and drag marks were detected. These findings suggested that a violent crime likely occurred there. An additional piece of evidence came when microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were discovered in the trunk of their family car. Moreover, during their search, investigators paid close attention to a recent purchase made by Jorge and his wife, a double orthopedic mattress. It wasn't so much about the mattress itself, but rather its dense polyethylene wrapping, which analysis revealed had been used to transport Luz Maria's burnt remains. Additionally, several neighbors testified about having repeatedly heard Jorge verbally abusing and threatening his wife with death just days before her sudden disappearance. Her husband had shouted that he would kill her if she decided to leave him, and that he would hide her body so that no one would ever find it. Based on the data collected by expert criminologists, as well as the testimony of several witnesses, the investigation presented a gruesome picture of the crime. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021. The day before, the couple had a big fight, and Jorge once again resorted to violence with his fists. He had previously had issues with his temper, but this time, he went into an uncontrollable rage. He struck his wife multiple times, causing her to scream and cry for help. These screams were heard by their neighbors, but nobody called the police. During the beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and caused a head injury. After this brutal assault, he strangled her with his bare hands, and then attempted to dispose of the body. He dragged it into the backyard, doused it with campfire liquid, and set it on fire. However, Jorge did not anticipate how smoky and foul-smelling the burning flesh and hair would be. Concerned that neighbors might notice and call the fire department or police, he quickly extinguished the fire. He wrapped the charred remains in plastic and sought a secluded location where he believed the body would never be found. The most horrific aspect was that Jorge committed these acts in front of their young daughter. Despite her tender age, she somewhat comprehended what was occurring. The child, 3.5 years old at the time, witnessed both the beating and subsequent murder, as evidenced by her cries and screams, which were also recorded. Aware of some forensic techniques from his wife's textbooks at home, a fact due to their abundance, Jorge attempted to cover up his crime and establish an alibi. He found a dark stretch of road without lights or video surveillance cameras and disposed of his wife's body in a drainage sewer there, thinking he could go unnoticed. The next morning, he drove to her place of work along the usual route, as if he had taken Maria there just as he did every morning. The following day, he began to simulate an active search for his wife, calling her colleagues, acquaintances, and relatives. The criminal's lawyers delayed the trial as much as they could. They also attempted to throw the investigation off track. They insisted that all the evidence and witness statements were circumstantial, emphasizing that not a single piece of evidence unequivocally proved Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys tried to get the detention changed to house arrest. They argued that Jorge himself was deeply depressed due to being accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, Decisive evidence came from data obtained from Maria's phone. All this time, the device was in her husband's possession. On the first day after the crime, several messages were sent from it to different people in an attempt to create the appearance that Maria was still alive. Tracking all movements of the smartphone, that day showed it was constantly in the same places as Jorge's phone. Despite this evidence, lawyers tried to turn it in favor of their client, claiming Jorge found his wife's phone and drove around with it searching for her. Yet no one could explain why he was sending messages from it or calling it from his own cell phone. Another proof of guilt was bruises and scratches on Jorge's body found on the day of his arrest. These marks were photographed by experts and indicated that Maria clearly resisted. The most vivid was a scratch on his neck. Unfortunately, particles of Jorge's epithelium under Maria's fingernails couldn't be found because they were destroyed by fire. Despite many controversial points, the prosecutor asked for the maximum possible punishment for Jorge. Court hearings and proceedings were repeatedly postponed due to the raging worldwide pandemic. But in October 2022, Jorge was finally found guilty of his wife's murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Although he maintained his innocence throughout, custody of little Alice was given to her maternal grandparents, who admitted their granddaughter now holds the main meaning in their lives. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Danilo Cavalcante. On July 3, 1989, a child was born in the municipality of Esto in the state of Maranhão, Brazil. The boy was given the common Portuguese name Danilo. This child experienced a tough upbringing. He wasn't spoon-fed or comforted with bedtime stories. No one took him by the hand to school when he reached school age. Instead, like many children in his impoverished neighborhood, he grew up on the streets. The environment for adults and children in Brazil's favelas is marked by oppressive poverty, low living standards, and high unemployment. All these factors contribute to a thriving street crime culture. When growing up in such conditions, amid dirt, poverty, and lack of basic human necessities, one's instincts for self-preservation kick in. People survive as best they can or choose to. Unfortunately, most often someone who has known only violence from childhood may take the same violent path, since they know no other way. Our story today delves into horrific brutality and relentless obsession that can destroy lives. Such events unfolded recently. In 2019, Sarah Brando eagerly awaited the arrival of her younger sister Deborah and her two nephews, Ian and Yasmin, at the airport. After a failed relationship with her children's father, Deborah, who was 30 at the time, driven by a genuine desire to provide a better life for her children, moved from Brazil to Pennsylvania to live with her sister. The family quickly adapted to their new environment, enjoying their cozy home and improved living standards. Deborah Brando and her sister Sarah were inseparable. They worked together at a cleaning service and often stayed connected via phone calls throughout the day. Their lives were quiet and happy as they embraced their newfound circumstances in another country. However, an unexpected acquaintance altered their destinies forever. In 2020, while spending a day off with her children at a park, Deborah met Danilo Cavalcante, a compatriot who was 31 years old at that time. A trusting relationship swiftly developed between them. Danilo was attentive and kind to both Deborah and her children. Deborah fell in love with her Brazilian neighbor Danilo Cavalcante and believed she had found a dependable partner. After several months into their relationship, they rented a small house together and began living as one cohesive family unit. After some time, Danilo, whose temperament was often hot and emotional, began to lose interest in the apparent perfection of their family life. As he grew closer to Deborah, his jealousy and obsession intensified. Mistrust, without basis, gradually transformed into a need for total control over the relationship. Frequent conflicts erupted between the couple, often culminating in violence. Danilo would drink heavily every night and return home as a completely different person, almost like an angered animal. He demanded complete submission and obedience from Deborah, punishing her severely in front of their children when she resisted. Despite her strength and efforts to defend herself and protect her children, the situation became untenable for Deborah. Unable to endure such treatment any longer, she moved back to her sister's home. After numerous threats from Danilo, Deborah sought protection by going to the police and subsequently obtaining an order of protection from the court that prohibited him from approaching her. Despite her attempts to distance herself from him, Danilo pursued her aggressively, often resorting to threats of violence if she even considered ending their relationship permanently. Fearing for her safety, Deborah decided to investigate Danilo's background. She reached out to acquaintances in Brazil through social media and unearthed startling information about his past life and his reasons for coming to the United States. To her shock, she discovered that Danilo was not who he had claimed to be. On November 5, 2017, in Brazil, Danilo had fatally wounded a 20-year-old student named Walter Jr. Moreira dos Reis by shooting him 5 times near a restaurant in Figueroa for something as trivial as a car repair debt. Investigation revealed that the two men were friends before this tragic incident occurred. Following the crime, Brazilian authorities issued an arrest warrant after granting the prosecutor's office's request for preventive detention. However, Danilo managed to leave Brazil through Brasilia International Airport due to procedural disagreements within the judicial system that delayed registering this decision in the National Warrant Registry. This discovery left Deborah stunned as she realized how much danger she was truly in by merely being associated with Danilo Cavalcante. It wasn't until 7 months after the crime that Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally. In June 2018, on entering Puerto Rico, Cavalcante obtained a fake ID and eventually settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. Upon discovering Danilo's true identity, Deborah issued an ultimatum: leave her alone or she would reveal his identity. Unfortunately, this decision proved fatal. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her outside her house. The children were playing catch-up while Deborah chatted quietly with an elderly neighbor. When Danilo Cavalcante approached and pulled Deborah aside for a conversation, the neighbor looked on but did not intervene. The discussion initially appeared calm. However, at one moment, Cavalcante produced 2 knives and attacked her. Deborah fell to the ground as he stabbed her multiple times. Despite her children's pleas for him to stop hurting their mother, he continued in a frenzy, inflicting a total of 38 stab wounds. A neighbor witnessing this brutal act attempted to administer emergency aid and stop the bleeding while Deborah's daughter ran to get help and call emergency services. Deborah Brendo was rushed to a hospital but succumbed to her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to evade capture and remained on the run for several hours until apprehended by Virginia State Police. He was extradited back to Pennsylvania and placed under arrest pending trial. On August 16, 2023, in Chester County, Danilo Cavalcante's trial for first-degree murder commenced. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante had refused to accept the end of their relationship and had been intimidating Deborah through regular domestic violence since 2020. During the trial, Deborah's sobbing child testified, recounting repeatedly the terrifying events of that day. It took the jury only 15 minutes to convict Cavalcante guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Following the verdict announcement, Cavalcante was transferred to Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he awaited transfer to a federal prison. On August 31, 2023, around 9 a.m., an inmate managed to escape from Chester County Jail. Utilizing a chimney, he scaled the wall between 2 narrow hallways and ascended through the chimney to the roof. Avoiding the barbed wire fences, he broke free. Surveillance footage captured him in the tight space between 2 walls in the exercise yard. He used his arms and legs to ascend upward, eventually running across the roof. From there, he climbed over the fence and pushed through the barbed wire to gain freedom. Prison officials were well aware of vulnerabilities identified after Eagle Bolter's escape and believed they addressed them adequately. Officials thought that adding barbed wire after a similar escape attempt by an inmate named Eagle Bolter just months earlier would prevent any jailbreaks. Acting Warden Howard Holland stated that according to court documents in May, inmate Eagle Bolter had climbed onto the roof of the jail and jumped to a less secure location, but was captured less than a mile from the prison within about 5 minutes. In response to this urgent matter, the prison was closed, initiating a massive search for Danilo Cavalcante, considered particularly dangerous. Alerts were issued everywhere. Danilo Cavalcante, age 33, with black hair and possibly armed and very dangerous. The escape of such a dangerous felon gained significant media attention. The search for this fugitive was broadcast daily across all media channels. The Pennsylvania State Police chief overseeing the search held regular press conferences and briefings, providing residents with precise information about this special operation. He urged residents not to stay on the sidelines, but to take an active role through vigilance and observation to help determine the perpetrator's route. And it worked. About a few hours after the escape, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles of the prison. With the help of reports from local residents, Cavalcante was seen by camera in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Police set up a search perimeter around the area, securing roads and railroads that run through it to prevent Cavalcante's potential escape, and put up a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his capture. Authorities began searching within 2 miles of the jail in the heavily wooded area of Pocopson Township in Chester County. A local resident saw the fugitive in a creek bed just days after the escape, but he fled into the woods before police could find him. The search continued, and the perimeter expanded after he spent about a week on the run. A security camera captured Cavalcante at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden nearly 3 miles from the jail, just south of where law enforcement initially searched for him. There's a lot of ravines, tall fields, high grass, a lot of cover for a guy who is 5 feet tall and 120 pounds. Robert Clark, Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, stated on September 5th that in addition to tough terrain, searches had difficulty with extreme heat and humidity lasting for several days. After a week of desperate searches for Cavalcante, the number of officers involved grew from 250 to almost 400. The search team has been strengthened not only in numbers, but also in equipment. Helicopters flying over began playing a recorded message from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother, begging him to surrender peacefully. The next morning, Cavalcante was spotted by a security camera on property located about 2 miles south of the prison. Police moved in and set up a new perimeter around this facility in Longwood, as well as nearby schools. These areas will be closed while search efforts continue. Police conducted an intensive search over several days until eventually Longwood Gardens briefly reopened with limited access before being forced to evacuate and close again following another sighting of Cable. On September 7th, law enforcement doubled the reward for information leading to his capture from $10,000 to $20,000. After nearly a week of searching, tension was palpable. Locals knew a man convicted of murder was on the loose. Yet, authorities had not disclosed how Cavalcante escaped from prison. In Chester County, Philadelphia residents were instructed by police to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors. CBS News reported that 34-year-old Danilo Cavalcante escaped from a Pennsylvania prison. The intense search pressed on until a significant development occurred on September 9th. Cavalcante somehow managed to the search perimeter in Longwood Gardens. He was seen on a video intercom, standing on a porch of a former colleague's home near Phoenixville, almost 20 miles northeast of the search area. Cavalcante cleverly altered his appearance. He shaved and donned new clothes, and remained undetected as he moved across the state. He stole a van from a local dairy store and drove it with hopes of getting help and shelter from acquaintances. On the morning of September 10th, authorities discovered an abandoned stolen van with an empty gas tank in a field in suburban East Nantmeal. The search area then shifted to the northern part of Chester County. Cavalcante's movements once again prompted changes to the search perimeter on September 11th. As investigators continued their efforts, Cavalcante was listed on Interpol's Most Wanted list, and the reward for information regarding his whereabouts was increased further. That night, emergency services received an urgent call from a local resident who reported that a man matching Cavalcante's description had broken into his garage. In self-defense, the homeowner fired multiple shots and hit him 7 times. Surprisingly, Cavalcante managed to escape and stole a .22 caliber rifle with both scope and flashlight attachments. Police arrived swiftly at the scene and discovered Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes nearby. Once they confirmed his identity and recognized that this dangerous felon was now armed, local authorities urged residents in South Coventry to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors whenever possible. This fugitive remains particularly dangerous, and his escape has deeply concerned area residents. Several school districts even canceled classes as precautionary measures to ensure safety. On the day after Cavalcante was seen on surveillance video, police expanded the search and urged residents to keep their doors locked. A new search perimeter set up in South Coventry Township, which was tighter than before because authorities believed Cavalcante was now surrounded. The search continued throughout September 12th. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, an aircraft with thermal imaging technology spotted Cavalcante in the woods. However, due to bad weather, The police had to wait until sunrise to approach as the surveillance plane could not operate safely. The significant breakthrough occurred in the early morning hours of September 13th, when authorities found out that a security alarm went off just after midnight within the final search perimeter. According to Biven, an officer of illicit drug enforcement, the aircraft using thermal imaging technology detected a heat signal around 1 a.m., shortly after the alarm was triggered. Ron Johnson, a retired Missouri State Highway Patrol captain, mentioned that technology played a major role in this operation. He said law enforcement faced many challenges for a long time, but managed to pick up the heat signal from a DEA spy plane just in time. At around 8 a.m. on September 13th, police found Cavalcante asleep with the rifle he had stolen from his home 2 nights earlier. Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, tried to escape by crawling into thick undergrowth. However, a police dog named Yoda subdued him by biting his head and holding him until police arrived. Lieutenant Colonel George Biven stated at a news conference that Yoda caused Cavalcante minor head injuries during his capture. Cavalcante was questioned by the police immediately after his capture. He revealed that he survived on watermelons and creek water and traveled only at night. He even admitted he almost got caught by an officer while hiding at one point. His plan was to steal a car and travel to Canada. Since returning to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following his capture, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed gratitude to all law enforcement officers who assisted in the search for high-risk felon Danilo Cavalcante. Chief George Bivens, who led the search, discussed the multitude of challenges that law enforcement officers faced during the operation to locate Cavalcante. He highlighted the intense heat and thunderstorms that occurred in the area during the search. Additionally, he noted that each of the search perimeters was established in heavily wooded areas. The search team was composed of approximately 500 law enforcement officers, including Pennsylvania State Police, FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals who thoroughly searched the area around the escape scene. In the wake of Cavalcante's escape, police set up a perimeter spanning several miles in each direction. The Chester County Jail Board, responsible for overseeing the jail, faced heavy criticism from local residents for their failure to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents pointed out that the jail had previously been given an opportunity to implement necessary security improvements after Igor Bolti's attempted escape on May 19th. Those enhancements could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape, since he used the same method as Bolte did. Following this incident, the prison has already terminated the prison guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's September 7th escape. Prison officials stated that this guard had a chance to spot Cavalcante during his breakout. In response to public concern, and days after capturing the fugitive, Chester County Jail announced they had installed a tin roof over the area where Cavalcante scaled 2 walls to access and eventually escaped from the facility. Alongside this measure, various other security enhancements and improvements were also implemented. Clearly, there are questions that Chester County officials will need to address regarding how the suspect managed to escape, especially considering this prison's history, said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He emphasized how crucial communication and cooperation among all law enforcement agencies and local residents were during this extensive search effort. Thanks to these combined efforts, Danilo will now never go free again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Blackburn family. On the morning of November 10th, 2015, a car was parked outside a home on Sunnyfield Court. Davy Blackburn had returned from his daily gym workout. Just as he was about to step out of his car, a phone call delayed him for a few minutes. After concluding the call, Davy leisurely exited his vehicle and entered his house. Upon opening the door, he froze. His gym bag slipped from his hands. His wife lay on the living room floor in a pool of blood. Confused and deeply shocked, he rushed to her side for an examination, felt for a pulse, and immediately dialed emergency services. The young woman was still alive, though the living room was in disarray. Items scattered everywhere, and her purse emptied. Upstairs, their small child was crying. Emergency services arrived within 8 minutes. Police officers and investigators filled the house right after it got cordoned off. Amanda Blackburn was urgently transported to the hospital. Now let's pivot back to understand more about Amanda's background, so we don't miss vital details of this tragic story. Amanda Grace Boers was born on July 31, 1987, in Muskegon, Michigan. She went to school in Indianapolis, Indiana, until her family moved to Elkhart in 1995. There she graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006 and later earned an associate degree from Pensacola Christian College in Florida by 2008. Amanda grew up in a deeply religious family where Christianity and God's teachings were central tenets of their lives. Her father served as the lead pastor at First Baptist Church in Elkhart. Thus, church sermons and psalter were ingrained in her from childhood. She knew them by heart and honored them wholly. While other children raced toward adulthood's temptations like parties and first loves, Amanda's passion lay in her faith and her dream of serving Jesus faithfully. Amanda, a blonde-haired, slim girl with a welcoming smile and genuine intentions. Not just beautiful on the outside, Amanda's thoughts and heart were pure. In every action, she displayed love for her neighbor. As a teenager, she took a vow of chastity, promising not to even kiss a man until marriage, and she always kept her word. Amanda's heart raced when she met Davy Blackburn, her true love. A native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Davy studied religion at Southern Wesleyan University and came from a devout Christian family. The two met on a blind date at a Hawk Nelson concert organized by Amanda's sister and Davy's best friend. At the time, they attended different colleges but spent every vacation together. Their relationship was purely platonic and free from earthly desires. They enjoyed walks together and shared intimate thoughts and favorite excerpts from church books. Their bond grew stronger as they found joy in simple things and joked sincerely with each other. Once before returning to school, they had a playful milkshake drinking contest, which Amanda lost. Davy teasingly called her Milk Girl, realizing then that she was the one he wanted to marry. The couple maintained a long-distance relationship for quite some time, constantly messaging via messengers, calling each other and chatting for hours. They spent every vacation together. Their respect for the seriousness of their relationship led them to see a psychologist to learn how to communicate properly. On August 1st, 2008, Amanda and Davy Blackburn were married. After the wedding, Davy told friends that from the moment he kissed Amanda, he knew there was a special bond between them, a part of God's plan. For the first 4 years after their marriage, the Blackburns lived in South Carolina, where Davy served as an associate pastor at New Spring Church under Pastor Perry Noble. But the young man wanted more, and he suggested to Amanda that she move to Indianapolis to organize a new church for youth. Amanda was reluctant to leave her family and part with her loved ones. For a time, she struggled with the need to leave South Carolina. Eventually, she relented after her husband told her that God must have big things in store for them. In 2012, the Blackburns moved from South Carolina to Indianapolis to plant an independent, high-profile church on the city's north side. The religious organization started by the young family focused on young people, as made clear in the weekly videos they posted on their website, which discussed relationship advice, conflict resolution, and biblical perspectives on intimate relationships. By 2014, the family had welcomed their firstborn child, Weston Blackburn. They were perfectly happy with their comfortable home on a quiet street and their favorite roles within the church. This church was regularly attended by many young people who listened to and believed in their sermons. The family lived in perfect harmony and understanding. However, everything changed on November 10, 2015. Ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence in the 2800 block of Sunnyfield Court around 8 a.m. The pregnant young woman was rushed to hospital, where she was hooked up to a ventilator and underwent several resuscitative. Sadly, Amanda died the next day, along with her unborn baby. As it turned out, the family had been expecting a baby girl who was named Evie Grace at her burial. Her death sparked significant sympathy and prayers on social media over an extended period of time, as friends, family members, and strangers mourned Amanda with public posts. On November 11th, the day Amanda was officially declared dead, Davy released an official statement saying that Amanda made it her life's calling to love and serve everyone. She dedicated her life to knowing Jesus as her personal Savior, and through passing and legacy, countless others will come to a saving faith in Christ. I firmly believe that God remains good, turning our tragedy into triumph, and that indeed the best is yet to come, Dave wrote. The murder of the pregnant woman was not only a devastating blow to the entire Orthodox family, but also a profound shock to the entire state. People demanded that those responsible for Amanda and her unborn child's death be brought to justice. In his first interview, Davy Blackburn recounted finding his wife Amanda injured and unconscious on the living room floor. She was partially unclothed, with her underwear lying nearby and herself lying face down in a pool of blood. The pastor informed investigators that he had left the house around 6 a.m. to go to the fitness center for a workout. When he departed, he left the door unlocked. He mentioned this habit during his statement, saying, "You always do that too, don't you? You leave and don't lock the door." While it's hard to say whether securing the door would have prevented this tragedy entirely, it's evident that it made entry much easier for the criminals involved. Unfortunately, Amanda did not have precious time to contact emergency services, resulting in an attack that left her with 3 gunshot wounds, one of them being fatal. No arrests were made immediately following this heinous crime. However, police quickly determined that Davy Blackburn was not involved in this horrific incident. Trial transcripts reveal additional details from Davy Blackburn's testimony, alongside accounts from witnesses such as Scott Floyd, an emergency medical paramedic from the Indianapolis Fire Department, who arrived at their home following Davy's 911 call. According to Scott Floyd's testimony, upon arrival, they found Davy Blackburn outside at the end of the driveway, with blood on his hands, but maintaining a very calm demeanor. Scott Floyd stated that Blackburn appeared not to fully comprehend what had transpired with Amanda when they reached him at their residence. Davy claimed he came home from the gym at about 7:30 a.m. and continued his call with his friend Kenneth Wagner in the driveway. He occasionally got out, strolled down the driveway, and peeked through the front door window to see if baby Weston was awake. He said he finished his call, entered his home at 8:10 a.m., and found Amanda lying face down on the floor. He thought she was sick or unconscious. He called emergency services at 8:22 a.m. It took him 12 minutes to make that call. In an emergency situation, 12 minutes is quite a long time. He repeatedly said he thought something had gone wrong with the pregnancy, and maybe she'd gotten dizzy and fallen. Did he not notice after 12 minutes that there was brain matter about 5 feet away from her body? Emergency room Dr. Scott Floyd testified that the blood on her head was coagulated, leading him to believe that the gunshot had occurred a couple of hours earlier. But those transcripts were not made public. Davy was asked if he had called anyone else after dialing 911. He said he called his father next. Defense attorneys did not cross-examine Davy Blackburn. Authorities corroborated his story with surveillance footage from the gym. Thus, he was not among the suspects. An autopsy conducted on November 12th showed Amanda suffered a gunshot wound to the back of her head. She also had a gunshot wound to her lower left arm that went through her biceps, and another one that entered and exited her upper back. Multiple scratches were found on her left cheek, along with a split lip and a knocked-out lower tooth. These injuries indicated a possible struggle between Amanda and her attacker. A thorough investigation was launched. CCTV footage from nearby streets was examined. Neighbors and family acquaintances were interviewed as well. One neighbor reported hearing gunshots about 35 minutes after Davy left the house. Another neighbor, Reginald Townsell, mentioned their street wasn't known for incidents like this, and expressed shock by stating that the Blackburns didn't deserve this tragedy. Everyone thought highly of the Blackburn family. They were seen as wonderful and loving people by their community. Based on Amanda's injuries and the missing bank cards as well as MacBook bag, robbery seemed to be an initial theory during this investigation. On the morning of November 10, 2015, several emergency calls were made reporting home invasions, various residences near Blackburn's home. Around 5:20 a.m., one woman reported waking up to find her cell, laptop, purse, and keys missing from her apartment. Her car was also gone from the parking. The sliding glass door to her apartment was. 3 hours later, another woman reported a burglary. Someone had broken through the patio screen and entered the house. According to police reports, for televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink women's sweater, a remote control, a bag of oranges and bedding were missing from the residence. Just 5 minutes after that second call, another individual from Sunnyfield Court contacted emergency services. This time it was Davy Blackburn. Lieutenant Richard of the Indianapolis Police Department stated that police were investigating potential connections between this homicide and the other burglaries in the same neighborhood that morning. The police have not disclosed details about the ongoing investigation to maintain its integrity. However, after obtaining images of possible suspects from one of the burglarized homes, they released these images to the public for assistance in identifying and helping with the investigation. Davy Blackburn expressed confidence that the police department was doing everything within their power to apprehend his wife's perpetrator. Investigators assured him that they had unprecedented support to continue their investigation and were optimistic that promising leads would soon help identify those responsible. Key clues instrumental in tracking down 3 suspects included a stolen pink sweater, cell phone records, and an ATM receipt. The receipt and sweater were discovered in a stolen Chrysler Sebring used during the robberies. Authorities recovered this vehicle on November 11th near Blackburn's home. The debit card listed on the receipt matched Amanda Blackburn's stolen card. Investigators obtained a warrant to examine ATM camera footage and discovered video showing the driver concealing his face with a stolen pink sweater. Police relied on DNA testing, surveillance footage, and witnesses' testimonies to identify those responsible for these crimes. The results from the DNA testing of the sweater confirmed that Jyan Watson was one of the suspects. Watson's identification marked the first significant breakthrough in the case, as indicated in the affidavit. Cell phone records were obtained because Watson's number was already in the database due to his parole for a prior burglary. Subsequently, Diana Gordon's cell phone records were also retrieved. These records demonstrated that both Watson's and Gordon's cell phones were present in the vicinity when the crime occurred. The phone records further disclosed that Gordon and Watson were near the Chase Bank, where Amanda's debit card was used on the day of the murder. Larry Taylor emerged as a critical piece of information when police examined surveillance footage from the area. This footage enabled them to identify Taylor's phone number and trace his address. In the subsequent days, reports surfaced indicating that a firearm had been located near the Blackburn residence. According to police, an individual delivered this gun to the Broad Ripple Fire Department, claiming they had found it outside the couple's home. Crime lab technicians analyzed the weapon over 2 weeks of investigation and detective work. Police eventually charged 18-year-old Larry Taylor and 21-year-old Jyan Watson with Amanda Blackburn's murder. Another individual, 24-year-old Diana Gordon, who was suspected of burglary, was arrested for a parole violation and not charged with a felony. He did not enter Blackburn's home during the incident. The crime lab confirmed that a gun found near Amanda Blackburn's home was indeed used in committing the crime. All 3 suspects were taken into custody. During questioning, Larry Taylor admitted to shooting Amanda twice, explaining he acted out of fear she might scratch him after she jumped on him. After she fell over, he leaned down and shot her in the back of her head, subsequently watching her bleed to death. The criminal trio intended to rob the Blackburn house for money. They chose their target upon noticing that Amanda's husband had left their front door unlocked when he went to the gym. Inside, they confronted Amanda to prevent her from interfering. During this confrontation, Taylor struck her with a gun. Watson and Gordon saw the woman and decided it was time to leave. They already had the stolen bank cards, so they went searching for an ATM. After failing to withdraw $500 from one, they successfully obtained $1,400 from another. This is when CCTV captured them. They then headed back to the Blackburn house to pick up Taylor. In their absence, a struggle took place inside. Amanda, regaining consciousness after being struck, lunged at the intruder. He tackled her in response. Following this, Taylor placed the stolen debit cards in the accomplice's car, who was at an ATM during the crime. Upon their return, he confessed to shooting Amanda, according to court records. The Blackburn home was their 3rd target on November 10th. Earlier, in their first break-in, they stole a laptop, wallet, and car while the resident slept. Inside that home, they noticed a recording camera, but moved on regardless. Next, they broke into another house through a patio window and stole 4 televisions, a laptop, jewelry, a bag of oranges, and a pink sweater that later helped police identify them. Court documents detailed this evidence collected against the suspects. The crucial piece was Watson's DNA, found on the pink sweater used to cover his face from surveillance, as he tried withdrawing cash with Amanda Blackburn's bank card. Watson and Gordon cooperated with authorities in return for reduced sentences. Larry Taylor waived his right to remain silent and admitted being near the burglary scene, but claimed confusion about his activities. Formal charges were brought by the county prosecutor. Larry Taylor faces 13 charges, including felony murder after knowingly killing Amanda Blackburn. Jalen Watson is charged with felony, along with multiple counts of burglary and theft. Diana Gordon, already in custody for parole violation, also faces burglary charges. Additionally, there was a 4th person aware of these crimes, but not actively participating in them. He was questioned and released. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit worked with the gang unit and federal marshals to arrest Taylor. Police Chief Rick Height praised the cooperation that led to the arrest. The detectives worked tirelessly all day, without sleep, to solve the murders in the city. With assistance from Assistant U.S. Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Terry Curry, justice was served. Because the victim was pregnant, prosecutors said they might consider filing additional charges related to the fetus. Even though the woman's underwear had been removed and her shirt pulled up, they stated there was no evidence to support rape charges. Larry Taylor's first trial took place in December 2021, but it ended abruptly when it was discovered that a juror had shared information about the case with other jurors. This disclosure interrupted the trial, leading to a mistrial being declared. The final trial took place in October 2022. Jury selection was more thorough this time. Over 100 individuals were considered as potential jurors, each having to fill out a 16-page questionnaire for attorneys to evaluate if a fair verdict could be reached. Larry Joe Taylor received an 86-year sentence at the Indiana State Correctional Institution for Amanda Blackburn's murder and for additional charges related to a home burglary. Diana Gordon and Jalen Watson agreed to plea deals and testified against Larry Taylor during the trial. Both received sentences ranging from 20 to 35 years in prison. Jalen Watson and Larry Taylor are currently incarcerated in the Marion County Jail. A murder conviction in Indiana can result in a prison sentence of 45 to 60 years, with some cases punishable by life imprisonment or even the death penalty. Prosecutors filed a motion to enhance Larry Taylor's sentence, potentially adding up to an additional 20 years since Amanda Blackburn was pregnant at the time of her death. Davy Blackburn, Amanda's husband and a church pastor, expressed relief that those responsible for his wife's death have been apprehended and will no longer pose a threat to anyone else. Amanda Blackburn's death has touched the hearts of many people, including the chief executive. Her funeral at a Christian church was attended by more than 2,000 individuals. Among those in attendance was Governor Mike Pence. The resident church has set up a donation page to assist with Amanda Blackburn's funeral and medical expenses. Davy Blackburn expressed hope for that will wisely handle those responsible for his family's immense pain. Remarkably, he has consistently reported that he has chosen to forgive Amanda's killers. Although everything inside me wants to hate, be angry and despair, I choose the path of forgiveness, grace, and hope.